Chapter 1. A Shocking Discovery. I have seldom attended an evening as elegant and as fateful as the one Lady Ravenscroft hosted in her Mayfair drawing-room. Crystal chandeliers scattered prisms of light across velvet drapes and gilt-framed portraits, while a string quartet's lilting strains wound through the air like silken threads. Lady Ravenscroft herself, newly widowed yet a vision of calm dignity, received each guest with stately grace, her midnight blue shawl draped about her shoulders like a whispered secret. I, Captain Hastings, nursed my flute of champagne beside, my friend Hercule Poirot observing the glittering assembly of financiers, diplomats, and society luminaries. All was refinement and courtesy, until a single piercing gasp shattered the tranquillity. The cry came from Lady Ravenscroft herself. One moment she stood poised before her guests. The next, her head tilted back as though astonished by an unseen blow. Her shawl slipped, revealing a vivid stain blossoming at her throat, crimson against the ivory lace of her chemisette. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. China rattled on a nearby side table, and the quartet's bows came to an abrupt halt. I sprang forward, but Poirot was already at her side, calm as ever. He pressed a slender gloved hand to her neck, then raised his other hand to still the frantic servants rushing in. "She's been stabbed," someone whispered. Poirot's eyes, those keen dark beads, swept the room. "Observe the precision of this wound," he declared quietly, extending a single finger to point at the narrow puncture. Not the work of a panicked assailant, but of a deliberate, practised hand. As guests recoiled, Poirot crouched beside the prone widow. He closed her eyes with gentle respect and turned to the butler. "Summon Inspector Japp at once, and see that no one leaves this house." His calm authority quelled chaos. Murmurs fell to hushed whispers, and the staff hastened away on muted feet. When the butler had retreated, Poirot rose and beckoned me to his side. In his palm lay Lady Ravenscroft's shawl, now stained and crumpled. The tiny silver pin that had secured it lay nearby on the polished floor. Poirot picked it up, holding it between thumb and forefinger as though it were a rare jewel. "Remark, Hastings, how this pin bears slight abrasion on its edge, as if struck against something hard," he observed. "And note this single crimson fibre caught within its clasp, far too vivid to belong to the shawl's original design. A most intriguing hint." I peered at the pin and fibre. The pin's enamelled filigree formed the letter R, undoubtedly matching the widow's initial. Yet I wondered how the bloodied wool had become entangled here. Before I could reply, Inspector Japp entered with 2 constables. His usual impatience was tempered by the gravity of the scene. "Poirot," he greeted, surveying the body. "What have you here?" "A crime of exquisite subtlety," Poirot answered. "I am pleased you have arrived, Inspector. I would beg you to secure this room. Every guest must remain until we have completed our preliminary inquiries." Japp nodded curtly. "Very well, but I shall oversee the scene." "As I should expect," Poirot replied, his tone polite yet firm. He gestured toward the cluster of guests now standing in anxious knots. "We shall begin by hearing the account of those present. Hastings, please ensure that Lady Ravenscroft's personal effects are gathered. Gloves, reticule, any letters or notes she may have carried." I touched my lapel and whispered to a passing footman, who bowed and hurried away. Poirot turned To the assembled circle, his stature diminutive against the tall windows, but commanding nonetheless. "Mesdames et messieurs," he announced, "I am Hercule Poirot. I understand that such an incident is most distressing, but I ask your patience. No one may depart until we have spoken. I intend to uncover the truth, however concealed it may be." Faces, pale in the lamplight, reflected a mixture of fear and fascination. Among them I recognized Lord Pembroke, perspiring despite the chill, Miss Carrington, trembling and clutching her fan, Edward Ravenscroft, the cousin of the late widow's husband, standing rigidly by the hearth, and others whose features I had not yet noted. Each had been close enough to commit this deed. Poirot returned his attention to the shawl on the floor. "We will need every thread of this garment examined," he said softly. "But more importantly, we shall uncover who and why one among us chose this precise moment to kill." A distant clock chimed the hour. The couple at the nearest wall exchanged a startled glance, as though reminded of a secret oath. Poirot pocketed the pin with utmost care, then addressed Inspector Japp. "Let us begin with the timings. Who last spoke to Lady Ravenscroft before the fall, and what were their actions thereafter?" As questions unfurled like the first threads of a tapestry, I sensed that beneath the glittering veneer lay motives as dark and tangled as the midnight blue of that fatal shawl. In the coming hours, every gesture, hesitation, and contradiction would be weighed under the scrutiny of Poirot's little grey cells, until the murderer's identity emerged from the shadows. Chapter 2. The Gathering of Suspects. Once, the constables had gently borne Lady Ravenscroft's body away. The drawing-room felt emptier, as though the lifeblood had been drained from its very walls. Poirot remained standing beside the mantelpiece, hands clasped behind his back, surveying the assembled guests with unerring calm. I noted the sharp contrast between his composed poise and the tremor of anxiety that still clung to the others. Lord Pembroke, tall and austere, folded his arms, his jaw set as though bracing against some inward storm. Miss Carrington fanned herself with trembling fingers, her eyes darting as though expecting to see a phantom assailant lurking behind every velvet curtain. Edward Ravenscroft, the widow's cousin, paced near the window, his gait measured but strained, the tension in his shoulders betraying a restless mind. Poirot cleared his throat. "Mes amis, before we proceed to individual interviews, I should like each of you to recount in brief your whereabouts and actions from the moment Lady Ravenscroft entered the room until the tragic event occurred." His voice was gentle yet insistent, an invitation to speak and a summons to confess all at once. A hush settled. Even the servants who peered from the corridors seemed suspended in mid-breath. Lord Pembroke stepped forward first. His voice was low and controlled. "I was speaking with the Baron von Stein in the corner. We discussed the proposed loan for the Ravenscroft estate. I excused myself to refill my glass, then returned to find her—" He paused, swallowing, visibly in distress. He glanced at the empty decanter on a nearby side table. "I remember she seemed troubled when I left. I offered her a glass of claret, but she declined." Poirot nodded, jotting a few notes in his small black notebook. "Thank you, Lord Pembroke. And after you saw her again, what did you do?" "I stepped back to allow others to attend to her," Pembroke answered. I did not touch her shawl or move anything else." His gaze flickered toward the shawl, now folded carefully on a velvet settee. Miss Alice Carrington was next. Her cheeks still bore the flush of embarrassment from earlier that evening. I had come to apologize for spilling my champagne," she said, her voice quavering. She was most gracious about it. I retrieved a handkerchief and dabbed my skirt. Then I offered to fetch her some water, thinking perhaps the excitement had overtaxed her. But the moment I turned, I heard the gasp. She pressed her hand to her throat, as though to still an echo of terror. When I looked back, she was on her knees. The shawl had slipped, and I saw the blood. Her voice broke, and she paused to compose herself. Poirot inclined his head in sympathy, then turned gently to me. "Hastings, please ensure Miss Carrington is offered some water and comfort. She has been through a frightful ordeal." I hurried to summon the butler, who promptly brought a glass of iced water. While Alice took a few grateful sips, Poirot addressed the next witness. Baron von Stein cleared his throat. A slight man with a waxed moustache and impeccable posture, he spoke with a faint German accent. "I was discussing agricultural prospects in India with Lady Ravenscroft. She had an interest in funding new tea plantations. I excused myself briefly to see to a telephone call at the adjacent room. I returned within 2 minutes to find this horror." He shuddered, adjusting his white gloves. "I did not touch her shawl, nor was I near enough to do so." Poirot asked a few precise questions. The length of the call, whether he had seen anyone else approaching, and what he had noted of the room's arrangement. Von Stein replied matter-of-factly, though his eyes flickered as if troubled by some hidden thought. Poirot made a small mark in his notebook, then invited the Baron to await further questions in the library. One by one, Poirot called each guest aside. Lady Arbuthnot, who had been sketching a quick pastel portrait, Sir Reginald Blakely, a financier whose handshake had seemed too firm, Mrs. Whitcomb, a distant cousin with bright eyes and an air of allergic fragility, and Dr. Langford, the attending physician who had arrived earlier to tend to Lady Ravenscroft's persistent cough. Each account was meticulously recorded, cross-referenced, and measured for inconsistencies, though Poirot never revealed his judgments openly. Throughout this process, I observed Poirot's subtle mannerisms. The gentle tilt of his head, the narrowing of his eyes when a detail struck him as discordant, the delicate tap of his finger against notebook pages when he heard something particularly telling. When Lady Arbuthnot confessed she had left her sketchbook on the table, and in her haste had not touched the shawl, Poirot merely nodded. But when Dr. Langford admitted he had slipped behind the screen to collect a glass from the tray, and caught a glimpse of something red at the widow's collar, Poirot's pen hovered over the page a moment longer. By the time the last guest, Mrs. Whitcomb, had finished describing how she had only meant to fetch more candles from the sideboard, the initial shock had given way to a collective wariness. Eyes met eyes. Whispers passed like currents beneath the surface. None dared accuse another outright, but the air was thick with suspicion. Poirot summoned us all back to the centre of the room. "Mesdames et messieurs," he announced, "I thank you for your patience and candour. Your accounts will prove invaluable. Yet, before we continue, there remains one aspect that has not been addressed. The positioning of the shawl and the pin." He approached the settee where the shawl lay, smoothing it out with care. "Observe, Hastings, how the folds fold unnaturally here," he murmured, pointing to a subtle crease. "And see how the pin, once holding it, lies on the velvet, untouched until we retrieved it." He lifted the pin, turning it so that the slight chip on its edge caught the lamplight. "My dear friends, either someone removed the pin deliberately, perhaps to conceal evidence, or it fell in the struggle. But the blood-tinted fibre within the clasp tells me more, that the shawl was drawn roughly, and that the killer's sleeve was of a red hue." He let his gaze sweep the assembled company. Some shifted uneasily, others paled. "Red," he repeated softly. "Yet no one here appears to wear that colour. Whose sleeve bore that tone this evening?" A silence followed, broken only by the faint ticking of the tall clock in the corner. Poirot tucked the pin into his waistcoat pocket, his expression inscrutable. "We shall speak further, one by one," he said. "For now, I ask that you remain here. I intend to examine the scene more closely, with the inspector's permission, and to consider the hidden currents of motive that brought us to this moment." As the guests settled into uneasy chairs, I saw Lord Pembroke glance at Miss Carrington, her handkerchief stained by her earlier mishap now pressed to her lips. Edward Ravenscroft leaned forward, elbows on knees, eyes dark with thought. Even the Baron von Stein, so measured moments before, now appeared afflicted by doubt. I took my place beside Poirot, who surveyed the room with a satisfied glint. "Hastings," he whispered, "the threads we have gathered are many, but the pattern remains concealed. A web of secrets lies here, and each must be revealed in its proper time. We proceed with caution, and with full use of the little grey cells." I nodded, fully aware that the next moves in this psychological game would be as crucial as the initial shock. Outside the windows, the gas lamps of Mayfair flickered in the gathering dusk, and within that dim light, I sensed that the true drama was only just beginning. Chapter 3. Initial interviews with the drawing-room secured, and each guest handed to my faithful care, Hercule Poirot prepared to delve deeper into the minds of our assembled suspects. The gaslight above cast long shadows upon the polished parquet, giving the scene an almost theatrical gravity. One by one, Poirot requested the privilege of a private word in the adjoining library, a wood-panelled sanctuary now repurposed as an interrogation chamber. Interview with Lord Pembroke. Lord Pembroke was the first to be summoned. He rose stiffly from his chair, smoothing the front of his tailcoat as though adjusting a mask of propriety. Poirot guided him into the library and offered him a chair, while I stood discreetly in the doorway. "Lord Pembroke," Poirot began, adopting an unhurried tone, "you were discussing the Ravenscroft estate's finances moments before this tragedy. Pray tell me, was the prospect of that loan ever unwelcome to you?" Pembroke's pale blue eyes fixed on the small bronze statuette upon the mantel. "On the contrary, Monsieur Poirot, the loan would be most welcome, for my own concerns as much as for the estate's welfare." He paused, measuring his words. "I have investments tied to the Ravenscroft holdings. Their stability reflects upon my own fortunes." Poirot inclined his head. "And yet you offered Lady Ravenscroft a glass of claret, which she declined. Why might she refuse an ordinary courtesy?" Pembroke lifted a single shoulder. She had an aversion to claret, I believe. She preferred lighter vintages. He cleared his throat, but I would not presume to question her tastes. Of course not, Poirot agreed smoothly. Yet you noted she seemed troubled when you returned. Did you remark upon any unusual behaviour? Lord Pembroke's jaw tightened. Only that she appeared distraught, though I assumed it was at some business correspondence. He paused, again, his expression twitching as if he had momentarily glimpsed something unsettling. I did not see anyone approach her in my absence. I was no more than 3 paces away. Poirot's moustache twitched in silent appreciation of the detail, and when the fatal cry sounded, you stepped forward to assist. Pembroke hesitated. Naturally. He straightened as though resuming a rehearsed posture. I would never have harmed her. Poirot offered him a thin smile. Nor would I suggest otherwise, mon ami. Yet precision in one's account is the first step toward truth. With a polite nod, Lord Pembroke was escorted back to the drawing-room, his composure restored, but his eyes notably restless. Interview with Miss Alice Carrington. Next came Miss Carrington, her lavender gown a stark contrast to the solemnity of the scene. She followed Poirot with downcast eyes, clutching her handkerchief as though it were a talisman. Miss Carrington, Poirot greeted, you were most gracious in your concern for Lady Ravenscroft's comfort. Tell me truly, what did you observe of her demeanour? Alice seated herself, her voice tremulous. She seemed distracted. I offered to fetch water, but she asked only for a moment's silence. She said she had heard something, an odd scraping behind the curtains. Her hand fluttered to her throat. I thought it odd, but I did not wish to alarm her. Poirot steepled his fingers. A scraping, you say? Did you investigate this sound? I moved closer, but then I heard her gasp. I turned to call for help, and by the time I looked back, she was collapsing. Alice's tears glistened in the lamplight. I did not touch her shawl. I only knelt beside her to offer comfort. Your candour is appreciated, Poirot said kindly. But tell me, what of your own gown? It bears a faint stain. He indicated a tiny smudge upon her skirt. Alice's eyes widened. Oh, that must be from when I spilled my champagne earlier. I tried to dab it away. Indeed, Poirot murmured, making a notation. Yet the hue of this mark is pale pink, quite unlike the deeper crimson on Lady Ravenscroft's shawl. He paused, allowing the implication to settle. Pray, consider carefully whether your recollection is exact in all particulars. Alice swallowed and nodded. I will reflect. Poirot rose and released her, her shoulders slumped but her gaze steady. Interview with Baron von Stein. The Baron awaited in the corner of the library, gloved hands clasped before him. He bowed slightly as Poirot entered, his waxed moustache quivering. Baron, Poirot began, you spoke with Lady Ravenscroft on the subject of tea plantations. You then stepped away for a telephone call. Did you notice any shadow at the window, or any disturbance in the room? The Baron pursed his lips. I observed no one. The call was urgent. I spoke with my agent in Calcutta. When I returned, the room was unchanged until the cry. He adjusted his cuffs. I assure you, I had neither cause nor opportunity to harm her. Poirot's eyebrow rose. And the telephone? You used the corner extension by the sideboard. Yes, the Baron answered. but the set itself may have masked sound. I cannot say whether anyone approached during that interval. Curious, Poirot mused. For Lady Ravenscroft's shawl lay next to that very sideboard when I entered. He glanced at me, and I inclined my head, confirming Poirot's observation from earlier. The Baron's moustache bristled. The servants may have moved it in confusion. Perhaps, Poirot conceded. Yet the pin was found on the opposite side of the room. A deliberate displacement, it would seem. Poirot tapped the notebook. I trust you understand my inquiry is but to illuminate the truth. The Baron inclined his head, expression inscrutable, and departed. Interview with Edward Ravenscroft. Edward Ravenscroft, the cousin of the late lady's husband, was the final guest Poirot summoned before nightfall. His usual reserve had given way to a restless intensity, as though he struggled to contain some inner tumult. "Edward," Poirot said softly, "your family bonds with Lady Ravenscroft were close, were they not?" Edward ran a hand through his dark hair. "We were cousins, yes, but our relation was distant. We saw each other only at family gatherings. Of late, I had meant to visit her to discuss some private affairs regarding the estate. And did you ever broach this subject?" Poirot inquired, leaning forward. Edward's gaze dropped to his boots. "No. I arrived late, hoping to speak later in private. I spoke only briefly of the family's condolences." He paused. "I regret now that I did not press the matter." His voice grew sombre. She seemed troubled, more than I had ever known her. "I wished to offer assistance." "Assistance or favour?" Poirot asked, his tone neutral but probing. Edward's head snapped up. "I would never seek favour through treachery." His eyes glistened. "I came only to help, though I confess I was surprised by her shawl. It belonged, I know, to her late husband's family." His expression shifted. "I meant to suggest she sell it to cover estate expenses, but I did not dare, not with her grief so fresh." Poirot closed his notebook. "Thank you, Edward. Your candour is noted." He placed a reassuring hand on the young man's shoulder. "We shall speak again soon." As the final door closed behind Edward, Poirot returned to the drawing-room, where I awaited him. The clock had struck 9, and outside the terrace lanterns glowed in the spring darkness. The guests sat in tense clusters, whispers hushed at the sound of Poirot's footsteps. He nodded to me. "Hastings, we have learned much, yet all remains cloaked in shadow. Motive mingles with opportunity. Each account is precise, yet riddled with omission. Tomorrow we shall resume our inquiries. For now, let us consider these threads. A pale pink stain that does not match crimson, a shawl moved from its place, and a telephone extension that may have served as cover. The game grows ever more intricate." I bowed my head. "Indeed, Poirot. And what of the red fibre?" Poirot held it aloft, catching the lamplight. "Patience, mon ami. This single thread will guide us further, as will the secrets yet unspoken. The true picture awaits revelation." He slipped the fibre back into his notebook, then glanced toward the assembled guests. "Let them rest, for the morrow shall demand their presence once more." Under the hush of Mayfair's night, the house fell into uneasy quiet. Yet within its walls, the gears of Poirot's little grey cells turned steadily, unravelling the knotted strands of guilt and deception that bound them all. Chapter 4. The First False Lead. With the moonlight slipping through the lace curtains, and the hush of anticipation settling over Lady Ravenscroft's drawing-room, Poirot rose to his feet once more. The guests, still shaken yet outwardly composed, looked to him for the next move. I, Captain Hastings, remained close at hand, ready to record his every observation. Inspector Japp lingered near the doorway, his arms folded and his eyes narrowed, as though expecting mischief at any moment. "Monsieur Poirot," Japp remarked, "you have heard your witnesses. What now?" Poirot's moustache quivered with amusement. "Patience, Inspector. The first false lead often serves as a test of our resolve. We must allow our suspect to believe themselves safe, only to watch their reaction when doubts begin to surface." He turned to the company. "Mesdames et messieurs, I propose we examine once more the scene of the crime. I ask that you remain here whilst I revisit certain details." With a graceful nod, he beckoned me to follow. We crossed back into the library, where the lamp burned low upon the desk. The shawl, now draped over the back of a chair, bore fresh creases from our earlier examination. Poirot smoothed its folds with fingertip precision, his gaze lingering on the spot where the silver pin had been forced free. "Note, Hastings," he whispered, "how the crease here suggests it was pulled from this side. A hurried gesture, doubtless." He tapped the shawl's hem, where the crimson fibre remained nestled in the silk weave, and observed the angle of the tear, horizontal, as though the shawl was yanked sideways. I nodded. It seems the killer did not merely strike. They intended to remove the pin. "Just so," Poirot agreed. "But to what end? If the pin were the weapon's identifier, its removal conceals the assailant's intention. Yet here it lies, betrayed by that red thread." Inspector Japp cleared his throat. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot, if you will pardon my impatience, are we to suspect a red-sleeved culprit among us?" He swept a glance over the guests assembled in the drawing-room. "No one here wears red." Poirot's eyes danced. "Just as I," said Inspector. "The false lead. We shall point to the red sleeve, only to reveal that our true author of this tragedy lurked behind another guise entirely." He pocketed the shawl and led us back into the drawing-room, where the guests had resumed their tense watch. Poirot addressed them crisply. "And I thank you for your patience. I have discovered a most curious fact. The assassin must have worn a garment with a red sleeve this evening." A murmur rippled through the company. "Therefore, I ask those among you who possess such attire to present it for inspection." Silence reigned for several heartbeats. Then Dr. Langford, the widow's physician, shifted in his chair. His crisp morning coat bore a faint red stain upon the cuff, just enough to catch Poirot's trained eye. "The end." Langford rose at once. I fear this red smudge may be from the wine I delivered to Lady Ravenscroft earlier this afternoon," he stammered, his professional composure cracking. "A small drop upon my sleeve. I thought nothing of it." Poirot inclined his head. "Dr. Langford, would you be so kind as to remove your coat and allow us to inspect the stain?" The doctor obeyed with shaking hands, exposing a pale linen shirt beneath. As the doctor laid his coat upon a nearby table, Inspector Japp and 2 constables examined the fabric. The stain glowed bright in the lamplight, yet its colour was inconsistent with claret. Instead of deep burgundy, it was vivid scarlet, like fresh blood. Poirot surveyed the doctor with measured scrutiny. "Dr. Langford, You admitted to being behind the screen at the sideboard immediately before the tragedy. Could you explain your movements?" Dr. Langford swallowed. I went to retrieve the brandy decanter for her cough medicine. She had requested a drop of brandy in tea to soothe her throat." He paused, voice hollow. "When I returned, I saw the shawl slipping and heard the gasp. I knelt to assist. Perhaps I brushed it against my sleeve." "A plausible account," Poirot conceded, "except that brandy leaves no scarlet stain. Moreover, when I surveyed the scene shortly after the event, I found this shawl exactly as you see it now. Yet you were already tending the victim." He tapped his temple. "Tell me what you perceived in those moments." Dr. Langford's gaze dropped. "Only confusion and horror. I confess I may have overlooked some detail in my haste to help." He rubbed his temples. "I cannot recall touching any fabric." Poirot's voice softened. "Dr. Langford, I neither accuse nor absolve you. I seek only the truth." He turned to the inspector. "Let us keep the doctor's coat safe. We shall send it for chemical analysis. For now, Dr. Langford, you are cleared to observe, but not to leave." He offered the doctor a seat. As Dr. Langford slumped into a chair, the room buzzed with speculation. Lady Arbuthnot exchanged a glance with Lord Pembroke, their eyes alight with silent inference. Miss Carrington folded her hands tightly in her lap, as though to still a tremor. Baron von Stein leaned forward, his expression inscrutable. Poirot dismissed the inspector's constables. "Inspector, I believe we have our first false lead. Dr. Langford, though your coat bears the red stain, I find it unlikely the doctor is the murderer. Instead, someone has allowed us to focus on this stain, perhaps the true culprit among us." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Yet I fear we require a more cunning trap to ensnare the guilty party." Japp groaned. "You mean more theatrics, Poirot? I prefer to stick to facts." "Facts are indeed vital, Inspector," Poirot replied, "but our game is psychological. We must lead the murderer to betray themselves." He glanced at me. "Hastings, fetch me Lady Arbuthnot's sketchbook and Miss Carrington's handkerchief. I wish to examine them in tandem with the coat." I complied swiftly, returning with the requested items. Poirot spread them upon a small table. The sketchbook bore pastel smudges of deep red, though one page depicted Lady Ravenscroft's likeness in charcoal, with no trace of blood. Miss Carrington's handkerchief, white as ivory, showed the faintest flush of pink at its corner. "Notice," Poirot said, pointing to the sketchbook, "the red pastel here, which Lady Arbuthnot claims she used merely to outline the roses in her composition. And this pink tint on Miss Carrington's linen, she insists it dates from her earlier spill." He drew a careful circle around each mark. "Yet our fabric test shows no trace of pastel pigment upon the shawl, nor any pink residue on the coat. Instead, the red on the doctor's sleeve is pure pigment. Bombyx blood red, a dye used in high-quality tailors." "Meaning?" Japp prompted. "Meaning," Poirot smiled, "that the doctor's stain is genuine dye, not blood nor wine. It is sure, it points to a red sleeve, yes, but not necessarily this one. Our murderer may have borrowed a sleeve from an evening wrap, perhaps Lady Arbuthnot's own red evening stole, or even Lord Pembroke's burgundy waistcoat." He tapped the coat again. "The false lead is that we fixate on the doctor when, In truth, our culprit will believe we fixate upon them, and thus expose themselves in their attempt to misdirect us further. The company, visibly unsettled, shifted in their seats. Dr. Langford let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. Inspector Japp rubbed his forehead. Miss Carrington dabbed at her eyes with her pink-tinged handkerchief. Lady Arbuthnot's sketchbook lay innocently closed. Poirot addressed us all once more. Tonight I shall retire to consider these findings. Tomorrow we resume our inquiries with fresh questions, and with a trap that will flush out the true murderer. Until then, I bid you reflect upon the seeming truths you have offered, for I suspect one of you has already contradicted themselves. With that, Poirot gathered his notes and took his leave, followed closely by Inspector Japp. I stayed behind to glance at the shawl draped across the chair, its midnight blue folds belying the crimson secret they concealed. In that moment I realized how deftly Poirot had guided us into our first false conclusion. By illuminating Dr. Langford's red cuff, he had drawn the murderer's gaze, and with it their confidence. Tomorrow we would see whose resolve would crack under the silent pressure of Poirot's little grey cells. Chapter 5. The Psychological Game. It was nearly dawn when the household settled into uneasy slumber, yet Poirot rose with the first grey light, alert to every nuance of human behaviour. By mid-morning, after a modest breakfast of thinly sliced ham and fresh rolls, he summoned the remaining guests to the drawing-room once more, this time without Inspector Japp, whose officious presence might impede the subtlety of Poirot's design. As each guest entered, they found the room arranged differently. The sofas forming a circle, a small side table in the centre bearing 12 cards, 4 each of red, black, and white, with a single card of deep crimson lying face down. Poirot stood beside the table, his moustache perfectly waxed, his posture uncharacteristically relaxed. "Mes amis," he greeted, "today we shall engage in a little game, a jeu d'esprit, if you will. I invite each of you to choose one card from this table. The colour you select will, in turn, guide my questioning, for every hue reveals an aspect of one's character." With that, he stepped back, allowing the guests to approach. Lord Pembroke, still mindful of finance, selected a black card. Miss Carrington, anxious and sensitive, chose white. Baron von Stein, ever the pragmatist, took a red card. One by one, each guest chose. Lady Arbuthnot plucked a black, Sir Reginald Blakeley a white, Mrs. Whitcomb a red, and Edward Ravenscroft hesitated before picking the deep crimson that lay hidden beneath the others. A stir rippled through the circle, for the deep crimson had not been offered. It was an odd choice that none of the servants had touched. Poirot's eyes sparkled. "Ah, Monsieur Ravenscroft, you have taken the exceptional card. How extraordinary!" Edward flushed, glancing at the floor before seating himself. Poirot turned to face the circle. "Now, black signifies secrecy, white suggests innocence, and red implies passion. I shall address a question to each of you, in the order of your cards, beginning with black." He paused, letting the silence deepen. He spoke first to Lord Pembroke and Lady Arbuthnot, who had selected black. "Lord Pembroke," he began quietly, "you claimed yesterday that Lady Ravenscroft declined your offer of claret for personal taste. Yet a glass of claret was found shattered near the sideboard. Can you explain how it came to fall?" Pembroke stiffened. I did not notice it, Monsieur Poirot. Perhaps someone else knocked it in confusion. Poirot inclined his head. Perhaps. Yet only one person in this room had the calm to place that crystal deliberately. His gaze flicked to Lady Arbuthnot. And you, Lady Arbuthnot, why did you approach the sideboard immediately after the cry, if not to inspect wine bottles? Lady Arbuthnot's voice wavered. I thought perhaps she had spilled something upon her dress, and I wished to offer. Assistance, assistance, Poirot repeated, can take many forms. He made a note in his notebook, though he did not reveal his thoughts. Turning to the white card holders, Miss Carrington, Sir Reginald Blakeley, and Mrs. Whitcomb, Poirot posed a different question. Miss Carrington, you claimed to have heard a scraping sound before the gasp. Yet the curtains were drawn tightly. How could such a sound pass unnoticed by all but you? Alice faltered. Perhaps I imagined it. Poirot's eyebrow lifted. Imagined? Or did you wish to draw attention from some other sound? Sir Reginald shifted. I too heard nothing. Yet you approached the curtains at once, Poirot observed, pointing to a fresh crease at their hem. You sought to verify Miss Carrington's assertion. Sir Reginald's cheeks reddened. He muttered an apology, conceding that he had been restless. Mrs. Whitcomb, pale and trembling, admitted only that she had thought the gaslight falter, hinting at mechanical failure rather than human intervention. Finally, Poirot faced Baron von Stein, who bore a red card. Baron, you spoke of tea estates in India and then of an urgent telephone call. But when you returned, did you not adjust your cufflinks as you crossed the room? The Baron laid a gloved hand on his wrist. I may have straightened my sleeve, yes. Poirot tipped his chin. Oh, strange, for the sleeve you adjusted bore no blood nor dye, yet your cuffs appear immaculate. A red card, monsieur, suggests passion or anger, yet your composure never faltered. Baron von Stein's moustache quivered as he offered no further reply. Poirot turned at last to Edward Ravenscroft, and the lone deep crimson card. Monsieur Ravenscroft, you alone chose the special card, perhaps an unconscious revelation of your feelings. He allowed the weight of the moment to settle. Before asking, you said you wished to speak privately with Lady Ravenscroft about the shawl. Did you not also covet that very shawl? Edward's face drained of colour. I admit I admired it, he stammered. But to covet it, I only meant to suggest its sale, not its theft. Poirot's gaze softened. Yet you were the one who handled it last. Was it not placed upon your chair when you re-entered the drawing-room? Edward faltered, then nodded. I asked for her permission to examine it closer, believing it to have sentimental rather than monetary value. Poirot inclined his head. A reasonable inquiry, yet the shawl was stained before you saw it. Moreover, the pin that secured it held the initial R, a family emblem. Why otherwise handle it unless you intended removal? His eyes met Edward's, unwavering. The young man's throat worked with the effort of swallowing. Poirot raised a hand, calling a halt to the questioning. Mes amis, you have behaved admirably in this little jeu. Yet I suspect that by offering you the choice of these cards, I have observed your true natures laid bare. Note, Inspector Japp, though we have no evidence of guilt outright, the confidence of the guilty man or woman will waver at such indirect probing. At that moment, the servant announced that tea was served. The game, so playful in its appearance, had concluded, but the psychological stakes were unmistakable. As the guests filtered to the table for Earl Grey and delicate biscuits, I saw glances exchanged, some curious, others wary. Poirot lingered beside the central table, gathering the cards with slow deliberation. He slipped the deep crimson card into his waistcoat pocket, then addressed me in a whisper. "Hastings, observe how Monsieur and Mesdames feel compelled to explain the trivial. The innocent are baffled by my questions. The guilty strive too hard to justify every nuance. Tomorrow, our culprit will reveal themselves through impatience or over-eagerness." I nodded, reflecting on the uneven confidence of the suspects. As the drawing-room settled into its post-game quiet, I realized the subtle war of nerves had begun in earnest. Each heart harbored secrets, each mind a hidden motive, and only Poirot's delicate orchestration of this psychological game would drive the guilty party closer to exposure. Chapter 6. A Second Shock. The next morning dawned bright and clear over Mayfair, yet within Lady Ravenscroft's house, tension hung as heavily as the previous evening's gloom. Poirot and I breakfasted in silence. Thin slices of smoked salmon, soft-boiled eggs, and delicate toast, while the household staff moved with nervous quietude in the adjoining room. Inspector Japp had returned at first light with forensic experts, and I could hear muted conversation about evidence logs and locked cabinets. Poirot sipped his tea thoughtfully, eyes half closed. "Hastings," he said suddenly, "we must hasten to the drawing-room. A most extraordinary event has occurred overnight." I rose and followed him into the corridor. The butler, Mr. Giles, met us at the door of the drawing-room with ashen cheeks. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, you must come at once. It's the evidence cabinet. Something is amiss." We hurried inside. The room had been rearranged for overnight security. The shawl and pin rested in a glass-fronted cabinet, now firmly locked with Inspector Japp's key hanging beside it. But the cabinet door stood slightly ajar, and within the shawl lay rumpled on its hook, the pin nowhere to be seen. Inspector Japp strode forward, face thunderous. "By Jove, our prime piece of evidence has been taken!" He rapped sharply on the cabinet door. "No sign of forced entry. The glass is intact, but the lock shows scratches as though opened with a fine tool." Poirot surveyed the scene with cold precision. "Tell me, Inspector, who had access to this key during the night?" Japp pulled the key from his pocket. "I kept it on my person until I retired. Then I handed it to Giles here, who locked the cabinet before leaving." He turned to the butler. "Is that correct?" Mr. Giles nodded, voice trembling. "Yes, sir. I locked it at 10 o'clock after Monsieur Poirot and Monsieur Hastings left. I kept the key on my tray alongside the tea set, as instructed." "And you did not see anyone approach?" Poirot asked. "I saw no one," Giles confessed. "The house was asleep. Yet, when I returned at 6, the key was gone, and the cabinet open." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Remarkable. Someone moved the key from your tray, and then removed the pin, leaving the shawl behind. They risked discovery by opening the cabinet. Such a bold act suggests desperation." I glanced at the shawl. Its midnight blue silk still faintly stained, but otherwise undisturbed. "Why take only the pin?" I asked. "Because," Poirot said softly, "it is the most incriminating object. With the pin gone, our evidence loses its most vital element, the initial R that ties the shawl to Lady Ravenscroft. The criminal hopes to derail our inquiry." Inspector Japp strode to the window. "This is sabotage, Poirot. Someone here doesn't want the truth uncovered." He turned on the assembled company, who had been summoned by Mr. Giles's urgent announcement. Lady Arbuthnot, Baron von Stein, Miss Carrington, Sir Reginald Blakeley, Mrs. Whitcomb, Lord Pembroke, and Edward Ravenscroft. All stood in stiff rows, faces blanching as they took in the open cabinet. Poirot raised a gloved hand for silence. "Mesdames et messieurs, I regret to inform you that a critical piece of evidence has been removed from our custody. We shall need to consider who among us possessed both opportunity and motive to commit such an act within these walls, unobserved." A low murmur spread. Lord Pembroke's brow furrowed. Baron von Stein's moustache twitched. Miss Carrington pressed her handkerchief to her lips, as though to still a gasp. Poirot turned to each in turn. "Lady Arbuthnot, you remained here late to sketch your morning study. You would have been alone in the drawing-room around midnight." Lady Arbuthnot's eyes widened. I stayed to review my sketches, but I did not approach the cabinet." "Yet the cabinet door bears no sign of forced entry," Poirot observed. "You hold the talent for subtle manipulation. Must I remind you how you smoothed that shawl last night with uncanny precision?" She shook her head, pink ribbons at her wrists quivering. "I admit to handling the shawl, but I had no reason to take the pin." Poirot inclined his head and turned to Miss Carrington. "Miss Carrington, you confessed yesterday to hearing an odd scraping. Could you not have slipped here in the night to examine the cabinet?" He noted the faint stain on her gown. She trembled. "No, Monsieur Poirot, I was in my room, too frightened to move. I could not have stolen anything." Baron von Stein's gloved hands curled into fists. "I was up late writing letters. That key must have lain upon the tea-tray, accessible only to those who fetched it." Poirot regarded him coolly. "And you, Baron, are most adept at concealment. Yet your hands remain unblemished. No scratches from lock-picking." All eyes shifted to Dr. Langford, who remained in the hallway doorway, his coat cuff showing no sign of the scarlet stain from yesterday's false lead. Poirot fixed him with a steady gaze. "Doctor, you have been most helpful, yet you were absent from the drawing-room when it was secured. Where were you between 10 and 6? Dr. Langford swallowed. "I took my repose in the servants' quarters. I felt fatigued after tending to the lady." Poirot made no comment but turned to Edward Ravenscroft. "You, monsieur, hold the deep crimson card, an emblem of exceptional intent. You admired the shawl yesterday. Have you no desire to reclaim or protect it?" Edward's face paled. "I would not steal it. I regret touching it, but never to remove it from evidence." Sir Reginald Blakeley crossed his arms. "I saw Giles lock the cabinet. Who else had his key?" Poirot nodded to the butler, who produced a small bundle containing the morning's unused keys. "I had taken all the house keys to my room, except this one for the cabinet," Mr. Giles explained. "When I woke, it was missing. The others were undisturbed." Mrs. Whitcomb, usually timid, spoke up in a shaky voice. I heard a light click around midnight, as though a door had opened. She glanced at Baron von Stein. I thought perhaps the cleaning staff, but they should not have been here. Poirot pressed his lips together. A light click, he repeated. That is precisely the sound of this cabinet's lock. Someone slipped in here, undetected by the others, opened the cabinet, and took only the pin. He paused, letting the weight of the revelation settle upon them. This act, this theft, is our second crime. It demonstrates that the murderer is still at large and determined to thwart our inquiry. His gaze swept the room. I must ask you all, did anyone approach the servants' quarters during the night? Any movement in the corridor? Silence. Then Miss Carrington stammered. I saw a shadow on the landing when I woke to fetch a glass of water. I thought it was a servant. Did you see who it was? Poirot asked. No, she admitted. Only a silhouette. Curious, Poirot murmured. And you, Lady Arbuthnot, did you sleep well? She shivered. Not at all. I heard voices, low, urgent, beyond my door. Voices, Poirot echoed. So there may have been collusion. He turned to Inspector Japp. We shall need to search for that missing pin. It may reveal smudges of blood or dye. More clues to our culprit's identity. Japp ground his teeth. I'll have the house searched at once. Poirot raised a hand. No haste, Inspector. A hasty search may destroy delicate evidence. First, we must consider motive. Who among us benefits most from this sabotage? All eyes flickered to Edward Ravenscroft, his sombre expression deepening. Then Lord Pembroke swallowed hard. Baron von Stein closed his eyes. Miss Carrington bit her lip. Mrs. Whitcomb's shoulders trembled. Poirot allowed the silence to grow oppressive. Mesdames et messieurs, he said quietly, the game has advanced to a new level. The murderer is not content with a single crime. They will commit any act to protect themselves. Tonight I shall set a trap, one that will lure the thief into revealing their hand. Until then, I bid you remain within the house. None may depart. He squared his shoulders, eyes blazing. For the safety of all, we shall see that justice is not denied by petty sabotage. As he turned to coordinate with Inspector Japp, I caught his glance, a mixture of resolve and satisfaction. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation. The shawl's missing pin would be the key that forced the guilty party into the open. And when they attempted to reclaim or destroy it, Poirot's little grey cells would be ready. Chapter 7. Another crime shakes the house. Morning sun had scarcely risen when a sharp summons rang through the corridors. A maid's horrified cry that sent us all rushing towards the conservatory. The heavy oak doors stood ajar, sunlight slanting across the marble floor in streaks of gold and green. There, beneath a cluster of potted ferns, lay the lifeless form of Mr. Giles, the butler, his neck twisted at an unnatural angle, one hand clutching a small, tarnished key. Poirot knelt beside the body, his face grave beneath its meticulously groomed moustache. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, "our tragedy deepens." He lifted the key gently, turning it between gloved fingers. This appears to be the key to Lady Ravenscroft's desk, an instrument now stained with blood. Note the fine abrasion at its tip, as though it were forced into a lock. He examined Giles's other hand and found a scrap of paper, crumpled and torn. With the utmost care, he smoothed it out upon a garden bench. Inspector Japp, summoned at once, approached with a grim expression. "Another murder, Poirot. This is beyond all precedent." Poirot nodded. "Yes, Inspector. Our thief has become our second victim, and this scrap," he held it up to the light, "bears but 3 words. Find the truth." The letters were hastily scrawled, the ink smudged. A final plea from Giles, perhaps, to guide us to the murderer. He turned the paper so we could see the jagged edge where it had been torn from a larger sheet. As constables closed the conservatory doors, Poirot beckoned the guests drawn from their uneasy repose to assemble once more in the drawing-room. They entered in subdued procession. Pale Lady Arbuthnot, trembling Baron von Stein, Miss Carrington with red-rimmed eyes, Sir Reginald Blakeley, Mrs. Whitcomb, Lord Pembroke, and Edward Ravenscroft, each now bound by 2 unsolved crimes. Poirot addressed them quietly but firmly. "Monsieur Gilles has paid with his life for attempting to protect us. He discovered something in the night that imperilled his loyalty, and ours." He held the key aloft. "This is the very key to Lady Ravenscroft's desk, a desk from which he removed the shawl pin. He hid it in his quarters, hoping, perhaps, to keep it safe. Instead, he was silenced." He paused, letting the weight of that accusation settle. "But from his hand I recovered this scrap. Find the truth. He tried to warn us." A low gasp rippled through the company. Lord Pembroke placed a hand on his heart. Edward Ravenscroft's face went ashen. Even the impassive Baron von Stein looked shaken. Poirot continued. "We now know the killer's audacity. Having stolen the pin, they returned to kill Giles when he discovered its hiding place. This signals 2 things. First, the murderer has unrestricted access to every part of the house. Second, they feel cornered, ready to strike again rather than allow the truth to emerge." Inspector Japp interjected. "Poirot, we must search every room, question everyone anew. This house is no longer safe." "Indeed," Poirot agreed, "but more pressing is the pattern. Consider, mes amis, what Giles must have seen." He held the key to the desk and brought it here. What did he hope to find? The desk itself may hold letters or documents, perhaps a clue to motive or identity. Turned to me. "Hastings, fetch me Lady Ravenscroft's desk from her morning study, and bring the attending valet. He can assist." I hurried away as Poirot addressed the guests. "Until we reconstruct the contents of that desk, we cannot rest. But I ask you, each of you, reflect upon your movements between 10 o'clock and midnight, and again between midnight and dawn. For the killer moved at both intervals, first to sabotage the shawl pin, then to kill our loyal butler." Lady Arbuthnot, her voice trembling, raised her hand. "Monsieur Poirot, I did hear a scuffle outside my door in the early hours. I thought it was Giles moving about on his rounds." "Thank you, Lady Arbuthnot," Poirot replied kindly. "Your observation may prove crucial." He then addressed Baron von Stein. "Baron, you claimed to have remained at your desk last night. Did you hear anything?" The Baron bowed his head. Only the sound of footsteps pacing the corridor. Then a low moan. Poirot steepled his fingers. So Giles's discovery occurred before he sought to conceal the pin. The killer anticipated his interference. He turned to Miss Carrington. "And you, Miss Carrington, did you awaken again after fetching water?" Alice Carrington's lips quivered. "Yes, I saw a shadow slip past my door, thin, hunched. I thought it was Mrs. Whitcomb returning a tray." Poirot made a note. "Intriguing. And Mrs. Whitcomb, where were you at that hour?" Mrs. Whitcomb trembled. "In the library. I left to retrieve my shawl. Then I heard a cry. It was Giles." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "You retrieved your shawl. A red shawl, was it not? The one you purchased last month?" Mrs. Whitcomb let out a short gasp. "Yes," she admitted. Sir Reginald Blakeley cleared his throat. "This is speculation. We should wait for the desk's contents to guide us." Poirot dismissed him with a nod. "We proceed with caution, yes, but also with swiftness. Our next step must be to open Lady Ravenscroft's desk in Giles's presence, and to examine any letters, diaries, or documents. I have requested the key. Once we find it upon Giles's person or near his body, we will know where he hid it." Inspector Japp looked to me, then to Poirot. "Very well. Bring the desk. We'll open it in the presence of all." As I returned with the valet and the mahogany writing desk, a graceful piece inlaid with mother-of-pearl, Poirot turned to the group. "Mesdames et messieurs, tonight you will dine in the hall as a precaution. No one is to be left alone. Tomorrow we shall gather again to unveil the fruits of Giles's final act of loyalty. Until then, rest well, for the night brings new dangers when a murderer remains at liberty." We carried the desk into the drawing-room and placed it before Poirot. He ran his slender fingers along its surface, noting a slight warp near the lock, clue to repeated tampering. As a hush fell, I realized that we were poised on a precipice. The desk's hidden contents might yet shift the course of this intricate game, and only Poirot's little grey cells could illuminate the path to justice before another life was lost. Chapter 8. Poirot's Hidden Clue. The mahogany desk stood before us like a sealed promise, its polished surface gleaming under the lamplight as Inspector Japp placed Giles's recovered key into the lock. The assembled company watched in silence, each face drawn and tense. Poirot, his little grey cells already whirring with anticipation, hovered nearby, gloved fingers poised over the desk's lid. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said quietly, "this desk may hold the secret that cost Giles his life. Let us proceed with both care and haste." With a click, the lock yielded, and the desk's lid swung open. Inside lay a neatly arranged assortment of papers, Lady Ravenscroft's morning correspondence, invoices, and a worn leather-bound diary. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the contents. He first lifted a sheaf of letters tied with a black ribbon, scanning the handwriting swiftly. "These," he murmured, "appear to be routine requests for estate funds. Nothing remarkable." He set them aside and unfurled the diary, which bore her name in gold script. Flipping to the latest entries, he read aloud, "I am tormented by secret knowledge. I fear those I once trusted most may betray me. Yet I cannot yet confide in anyone. I must find proof before naming the guilty." A hush fell. Lady Arbuthnot turned pale. Edward Ravenscroft's gaze flickered with alarm. Poirot tapped the page with a slender forefinger. Note the phrase, "secret knowledge." She suspected someone close. Our murderer took the pin to conceal evidence, but the diary tells us Lady Ravenscroft herself had uncovered something. Giles, faithful to his mistress, would have found this entry and sought to protect it. He closed the diary and examined the underside of the desk's writing surface. There, hidden beneath a panel, lay a shallow compartment. Poirot pried it open gently, revealing a folded scrap of photograph, partial and torn. He extracted it, smoothing the curled edge against the desk. It is a photograph of Lady Ravenscroft with a gentleman whose face is obscured by the tear, Poirot observed, holding it to the light. Note the background, the terrace of Greystone Manor. He passed the fragment to Inspector Japp, then inspected the reverse side, where a single word was scribbled, betrayal. A collective intake of breath stirred the room. Sir Reginald, Blakeley's fingers clenched, Miss Carrington's lips parted as though to speak. Baron von Stein shifted uneasily. Lord Pembroke's eyes darted toward Edward Ravenscroft. Poirot continued. Giles discovered that Lady Ravenscroft's secret knowledge concerned Greystone Manor, her late husband's ancestral home. Here is the proof. He tapped the photograph. She had suspected someone of scheming against her interests there, and sought confirmation from this gentleman. He pocketed the scrap. I ventured a question. Poirot, do we know who this gentleman is? He shook his head. Not yet, Hastings, but observe that both diary and photograph were concealed in this desk, indicating she intended to confront him once proof was certain. Our murderer learned of these entries, hence the attempt to hide the pin and eliminate Giles. Inspector, Japp frowned. Who among us stood to gain from her silence regarding Greystone Manor? Poirot's gaze swept the guests. Monsieur Ravenscroft, as heir to the Ravenscroft line, would inherit Greystone Manor if his cousin perished, or if his widow's control of the estate were compromised. Lord Pembroke's investments are tied to Ravenscroft finances. Baron, von Stein's ventures benefit from any infusion of estate funds. Even Lady Arbuthnot, as a distant cousin, might see her own claim awaken. He paused, letting each motive linger. He then pointed to the diary again. Note the entry's date, 2 days prior to the party. Lady Ravenscroft had learned of a meeting at Greystone Manor scheduled for that morning, the day Giles was killed. She planned to attend incognito, to expose the man in the photograph. Instead, she was silenced here, and Giles was slain for stumbling upon her desk's secret. A tremor passed through Edward Ravenscroft. He swallowed. I knew of the meeting. She confided in me, briefly, before the soirée. She asked for discretion. His voice shook. I promised her I would accompany her, but she insisted on doing this alone. Poirot regarded him keenly. And you agreed, despite your own interests in Greystone Manor? Edward bit his lip. I thought her pursuit of truth more important than any inheritance. His eyes flickered towards the torn photograph. I did not recognize the man. His identity was hidden. Miss Carrington's hand shot up. I was the one who delivered her morning tea yesterday. She mentioned the photograph but refused to show it. Her voice was soft but clear. She said she feared treachery. Poirot nodded. Your recollection is invaluable. You observed her resolve. He then turned to Lord Pembroke. You spoke of estate loans, yet avoided mention of Greystone Manor's mortgages. Pembroke's eyes hardened. I admit I did not mention them, but only because they were settled privately. By you, Poirot pressed, or by someone who stood to gain from their secrecy. Pembroke's jaw clenched. That is slander. He glanced at Baron von Stein. Perhaps the Baron can enlighten us on Greystone Manor's debts. The Baron shook his head. My involvement was limited to agricultural investments. He wiped his moustache. I received no secret communications. Poirot considered their responses, then addressed Lady Arbuthnot. Madam, you sketched Greystone Manor in your pastel studies. Did you not show the photograph to your friend? Her eyes widened. We spoke of the manor's architecture, but I never saw this photograph. She glanced at Edward. Did you show it to me? Edward shook his head. I did not. Poirot's lips curved. We are left with a puzzle. Giles discovered the photograph and diary, intended to protect Lady Ravenscroft's secret, and paid with his life. The murderer sought to erase all evidence linking them to this treachery at Greystone Manor. Yet they revealed themselves by ignoring the torn photograph's significance, assuming we would disregard it. He pocketed both the photograph and the diary. Hastings, see that these are placed in the evidence vault. Inspector Japp, secure the desk. We shall need time to analyze every scrap. Meanwhile, I advise that no one leave the premises, and that all correspondence be surrendered to the constables. A heavy silence enveloped the room. Each guest looked uncertain, as though feeling the walls close in. Poirot turned to me quietly. Mon ami, our hidden clue has emerged, not in words, but in paper and scrap. We now know the motive lies with Greystone Manor. Tomorrow, we shall call for the gentleman in the photograph, if we can identify him, and corner our culprit. I nodded, heart pounding. Outside, the gaslights flickered as dusk approached. Within that shadowed drawing room, the threads of evidence converged upon a single truth, one that Poirot's little grey cells would reveal in the final reckoning. Chapter 9. The final gathering at early evening. Every lamp in Lady Ravenscroft's Mayfair home burned bright against the gathering dusk. Poirot had personally seen to each detail. The drawing-room cleared of unnecessary furniture, the chairs arranged in a precise semicircle, and a small table in the centre bearing only the torn photograph, still held in a simple wooden frame, and the leather-bound diary. Inspector Japp stood at one side, solemn and watchful, while the constables lingered discreetly by the doors. I, Captain Hastings, took my place among the assembled guests, each of whom wore an expression of tense expectation. Lady Arbuthnot sat nearest the fireplace, her pastel sketchbook closed on her lap. Lord Pembroke occupied the chair to her left, hands folded, gaze fixed upon the photograph. Baron von Stein leaned forward, his waxed moustache twitching as he watched Poirot's every movement. Miss Carrington's fingers fluttered in her lap, the pink-tinged handkerchief unwound and laid beside her. Sir Reginald Blakeley and Mrs. Whitcomb exchanged worried glances, and Edward Ravenscroft perched on the edge of his issue, his dark eyes shadowed with concern. Dr. Langford, now cleared of the false lead, sat with arms crossed, his white coat crisp and unblemished. Poirot entered from the library, his little grey cells glowing behind a mask of composure. He carried no papers, only his own presence, impeccable as ever. He paused at the threshold, then, with a gentle nod to Inspector Japp, took his place at the head of the semicircle. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "I thank you all for attending this gathering. Tonight we confront the culmination of our inquiries. 2 crimes, 1 motive, and I trust, the final resolution." He gestured to the framed photograph and the diary on the central table. "These objects tell the tale. A torn photograph of Greystone Manor and a diary entry warning of secret betrayal. Together, they reveal that Lady Ravenscroft had uncovered a plan to wrest control of her estate. Giles discovered her evidence, and for his loyalty, he was first silenced. Then, our second crime, the removal of the shawl pin to conceal the initial R. Finally, the murder of Giles with this key. He held up the tarnished desk key. When he attempted to protect the very proof our culprit sought to destroy, a hush fell. I saw Lady Arbuthnot's fingers tighten around her sketchbook, and Baron von Stein tilt his head as if listening for some hidden echo. Poirot continued, "Yet the most telling clue lies not in objects alone, but in the human heart. Each of you holds a motive tied to Greystone Manor. Lord Pembroke, your investments depended on the estate's solvency. Baron von Stein, your colonial ventures looked to new lands for expansion. Sir Reginald Blakely, you sought to underwrite the widow's counsel in financial matters. Mrs. Whitcomb, as a relative by marriage, stood to gain a small inheritance. Miss Carrington, you admired Lady Ravenscroft's confidence and feared her secrets might tarnish her reputation. Dr. Langford, your professional standing relied upon her continued patronage. And Edward Ravenscroft, as heir by blood, you were closest of all to benefit." He paused, letting each charge echo. Then he fixed his gaze on me. "Hastings, please retrieve the diary." I stepped forward and handed the leather-bound volume to Poirot, who opened it to the final entry. He read, aloud, "I speak now to the one I trust most. When you read this, know I feared betrayal by blood, and that the truth lies within the photograph's secret. Guard these pages, and if I perish, may justice be swift." He closed the diary and turned to Edward. "You were that one she trusted. You hold her confidence, and you confess to knowing of the meeting at Greystone Manor." Edward's throat tightened. I loved her as a cousin, and felt compelled to help, but never to harm. "Precisely," Poirot said. "You loved her, but you also coveted her estate." He studied Edward's face. "When she refused your request to sell the shawl, you knew her resolve, yet you still loved her, and in that love you convinced yourself you could save her from ruin." Edward shook his head. "You misunderstand me, Monsieur Poirot." "Perhaps," Poirot replied, "but let us examine another confidant." He turned to Lord Pembroke. "You arranged her loans and watched her withdraw from Greystone Manors. Care. Did you not warn her that secrecy could mean financial collapse?" Pembroke's voice was steady. "I offered counsel, nothing more." "Counsel can be coercion," Poirot said quietly, "and coercion can compel desperate acts." He swept his gaze around the circle. "Yet the photograph remains torn here." He tapped the frame, showing only a profile. "The missing portion bears the face of our murderer." He paused, measuring each expression. "Lady Arbuthnot, you sketched the manor, yet you never saw this photograph. Baron von Stein, you funded estates abroad, yet you never met the gentleman captured here. Sir Reginald, Mrs. Whitcomb, Dr. Langford, Miss Carrington, you all deny sufficient opportunity or motive. And so I return to you, Edward, and Lord Pembroke." He leaned forward. "I invited one more guest today, the gentleman in the photograph. You did not know his identity, but I have discovered it. Mr. Jonathan Ravenscroft, Edward's elder brother, who disappeared years ago under a cloud of gambling debts. Lady Ravenscroft covertly corresponded with him, until she learned he intended to claim the estate by fraudulent means." A collective gasp rose. Edward's face crumpled. Lord Pembroke's composure wavered. But Poirot held up a hand. "Monsieur Jonathan Ravenscroft confessed his intention to draw funds from the estate. When Lady Ravenscroft refused to help him, he threatened her. She recorded his words here in her diary. Giles found her entry and hid the pin to protect her. Jonathan, fearing exposure, removed the pin, then killed Giles when he discovered the hiding place." Edward sprang up. No, it was not he. I swear he never set foot in this house." Poirot's eyes glinted. "Then who did?" He turned to Baron von Stein. "You met Jonathan in Calcutta and helped forge letters to Lady Ravenscroft. You knew of his debts and his plan. When Giles discovered the diary, you had the skill to pick the lock and steal the pin. And when Giles confronted you in the conservatory, you struck him with this key." Baron von Stein's posture stiffened. He rose, face pale. "You accuse me, monsieur." His voice was taut with anger. Poirot inclined his head. "I do. Your motive, to ensure your colonial investments remained unthreatened. Your opportunity, Giles's rounds at midnight. Your skill, the unseen scratches on the cabinet lock. Your confession, revealed by your reaction to the photograph's secret. And your crime, here in the drawing room and in the conservatory." Silence thundered. Baron von Stein's lips trembled. Then, with a harsh exhalation, he raised his hand. "Yes," he whispered, "I did what I must. Lady Ravenscroft's family, fortune stood to bolster my ventures. Giles discovered my letters and threatened to expose me." His shoulders slumped. "I took the pin to derail his proof, then silenced him when he confronted me." Poirot nodded. "Mon Dieu." He turned to Inspector Japp. "Inspector, would you be so kind?" Japp stepped forward and placed a firm hand on the Baron's arm. The guests watched, stunned, as constables led the Baron away. Edward sank into his chair, head in hands. Poirot stepped to the table and retrieved the torn photograph and the diary. "Mes amis," he said softly, "we have seen how the most dangerous lies are born of the truest passions. Love of money, love of family, love lost. Let justice be served, and may we each reflect on the little grey cells that guided us here." He offered me a small, satisfied smile. "Now, Hastings, we have only one section left, the reveal of every detail to our company, and the outcome of justice." As the drawing-room settled into a profound hush, I realized this gathering marked not the end, but the threshold of closure, a final act where truth would emerge triumphant under Poirot's unwavering light. Chapter 10. The Reveal. Hush fell over the drawing-room as Baron von Stein was led away in the custody of Inspector Japp's men. The tally of evidence lay before us. The torn photograph, the diary, the shawl pin, and the key used to murder Giles. Poirot rose from his seat, face composed yet illuminated by triumph, and addressed the surviving guests with deliberate calm. "Mesdames, et messieurs," he began, "you have displayed patience and courage throughout these trying days. It is now my duty to bind the threads of our inquiry into a single tapestry of truth." He held up Lady Ravenscroft's diary. First, this diary entry, discovered in the hidden compartment of her desk, reveals that our victim had learned of a plan against her estate at Greystone Manor. She confided only in one person, her cousin, Edward Ravenscroft, who pledged to accompany her in exposing the plot. Yet she also corresponded with Baron von Stein's associate, Jonathan Ravenscroft, whose face you see here. He tapped the photograph, threatening letters crafted in Calcutta, promising fortune in exchange for her complicity. Poirot then lifted the torn photograph. Note how the image is incomplete. The missing portion bore the face of the conspirator, which Giles found and preserved. In removing the shawl pin, our murderer sought to sever the chain of evidence linking Lady Ravenscroft's initial R to her silk garment, hoping to mask that this was no random act, but a deliberate strike against one who stood in their way. He seated himself and beckoned Edward forward. "Monsieur Ravenscroft, you were entrusted with your cousin's secret, yet you know now that it was another's blood tie, the Baron's to Jonathan, that carried the venom of betrayal. Your earnest desire to protect her did not blind you to the Baron's culpability." Edward dipped his head. I was too trusting of him. He used my name and my brother's likeness to exert pressure. I should have spoken sooner." Poirot's eyes were kindly. "You have learned the harsh lesson that secrets among friends can become weapons in the wrong hands." He then turned to Inspector Japp. "Inspector, if you please." Japp advanced and produced from a small bag the shawl pin, wrapped in white tissue. "This pin," he said, "was recovered from the Baron's study, hidden beneath volumes of ledgers. It bears the abrasions Poirot noted." Poirot examined it and nodded. The Baron feigned ignorance when his cockade of colonial investments fell under suspicion. His familiarity with lock-picking implements explains the cabinet's undisturbed glass and scratched lock. He knew Giles would protect the diary. Thus, he struck at Giles with this key, its unique wear matching the injury to Giles's skull. Poirot then produced a piece of paper from his waistcoat pocket, the torn scrap reading, "Find the truth." Our loyal butler's final message was hidden in his hand, torn from an in-progress letter that exposed the Baron's forged correspondence with Lady Ravenscroft. He meant to deliver it to me, but was silenced first. He looked around the room, letting each moment sink in. Every one of you observed or experienced a fragment of the crime. The pale pink stain on Miss Carrington's handkerchief, the pastel smudge in Lady Arbuthnot's sketchbook, the claret glass shattered on the sideboard, all were red herrings, deliberately sown by the Baron to misdirect our attention. Lady Arbuthnot's whisper trembled. I did not realize." Miss Carrington pressed a hand to her heart. "Nor I." Poirot raised a hand for silence. "You were all innocent, though at times unsure. But the Baron's game was not merely theft and murder. It was a battle of little grey cells. He sought to draw our scrutiny to others, confident that his own crime would be overlooked." He rose and paced slowly before the semicircle of chairs. "Allow me to recount the Baron's movements. He dined alone with Lady Ravenscroft in a corner of the drawing-room, discussed tea estates and financial backing, then excused himself to telephone his associate, planting the notion of red-sleeved guilt by pressing his own red-themed card in our psychological game. He returned to find Lady Ravenscroft kneeling, then waited until the theatrics subsided to remove the pin. At that moment, Inspector Japp produced Dr. Langford's examination report. The scarlet on the doctor's cuff was industrial dye, as Poirot predicted, never blood nor wine. This cleared him and tightened the net around our true culprit. Poirot nodded appreciatively. Indeed, and when Giles attempted to protect the evidence by pocketing the pin, the Baron, fearing exposure, lured him to the conservatory under the pretext of discussing a pressing matter. There, he used the tarnished desk key, uniquely worn, to strike Giles and leave him to die among the potted ferns. He paused, letting the horror of the act settle. Thus, two crimes were one and the same motive: erasure of any proof against him. Yet in his arrogance, the Baron overlooked the smallest details: the alignment of the torn photograph, the hidden compartment, the final scrap of Giles's letter. Poirot turned to the Baron, who stood at the door with Inspector Japp. Monsieur von Stein, you will answer for these crimes before Her Majesty's courts. The Baron's shoulders slumped, and he made no attempt to protest. The constables led him away in silence. Poirot addressed the guests once more. Mesdames et messieurs, justice has its own pace, but tonight it marches forward. Let this serve as a reminder. Though secrets may lie silent, the little grey cells will always unearth them in time. As the household staff gently ushered the guests toward an adjoining salon for refreshments, I approached Poirot, curiosity alight in my eyes. Mon ami, how did you know to frame the Baron so precisely? He offered a modest smile. Hastings, no single clue spoke louder than another. They spoke in unison. The diary, the photograph, the pin, the key, the psychological misdirections, all converged upon the Baron's unique nexus of motive, means, and opportunity. One must simply listen. To their harmony, I nodded, impressed once more by the power of pure deduction. Outside, the lanterns of Mayfair glowed against the night, and within Lady Ravenscroft's home, the final chords of this deadly symphony had played their last, revealing a truth more intricate than any had imagined. Chapter 11. Outcome and Justice. Dawn broke over Mayfair with a pale crimson-tinted sky, the colour of fresh revelation. Within Lady Ravenscroft's drawing-room, the atmosphere was markedly different from the tense gatherings of previous nights. The guests, now freed from suspicion, sat in small clusters by the windows, sipping tea and speaking in hushed tones. The court messengers had arrived to escort Baron von Stein to Bow Street, and Inspector Japp was poring over his reports by the hearth. Only Hercule Poirot remained wholly composed, seated in his favourite armchair, hands folded over his waistcoat. Joined him with my own cup of Darjeeling. Mon ami, I ventured, the household seems to breathe easier today. Poirot nodded, his eyes serene behind his expressive brows. Justice has its effect, Hastings. The guilty are removed from our midst, and innocence is restored. Yet we must not forget the cost. Poor Giles, our faithful butler, whose loyalty cost him his life." At the mention of Giles, a gentle knock sounded at the door. Mrs. Cartwright, the housekeeper, entered carrying a simple wooden box bound with a black ribbon. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, "my master's personal effects, his watch, his locket, and his final letter are here, as you requested." Poirot rose and accepted the box with reverence. He untied the ribbon and lifted out a neatly folded letter addressed in Gilles's careful hand. "To Monsieur Poirot, and to those he holds dear, if you read these lines, I have fallen by treachery, yet let no man doubt the truth of Lady Ravenscroft's discovery. My life was offered to protect it. May this small box serve as testament to her virtue and my loyalty. Ever faithfully, Giles, butler to the late Lady Ravenscroft." Poirot's moustache quivered with emotion. His devotion was pure, Hastings. We shall see that his service is honoured. He turned to me. "Pray help me distribute these among the staff. Each should know that Giles's sacrifice was not in vain." I rose to assist, leaving Poirot to reflect by the hearth. By mid-morning, the household's surviving members had gathered in the garden terrace for a brief ceremony. Poirot addressed them with characteristic courtesy. "Mesdames et messieurs, we are assembled to pay tribute to a man whose devotion to duty transcended fear. Mr. Giles's final act was to preserve truth. Let us honour him by remembering that loyalty and courage, though sometimes fatal, are virtues that light the darkest corridors of our lives." Lady Arbuthnot laid a wreath of white lilies upon a small marble pedestal erected in Giles's name. One by one, the guests followed. Miss Carrington placed a single pink rose. Dr. Langford bowed his head. Even Lord Pembroke and Sir Reginald offered silent respects. In that moment, the solemnity of justice was balanced by the quiet dignity of remembrance. After the ceremony, we returned to the drawing-room for a light luncheon. The strain of suspicion had passed, replaced by gentle camaraderie. Lady Arbuthnot carefully resumed her sketching, capturing the portrait of Lady Ravenscroft's late portrait above the fireplace. Sir Reginald quietly discussed a potential investment in a local charity. Miss Carrington offered to teach Mrs. Whitcomb a new embroidery stitch. Even Edward Ravenscroft managed a small, grateful smile as he conversed with Dr. Langford. Poirot leaned back in his armchair, surveying the scene with satisfaction. "Hastings," he murmured, "I believe the balance of this house has been restored. The innocent are freed, and the guilty are punished. Yet in every human heart lies the seed of duplicity. It takes but one moment's weakness or betrayal to set these dark events in motion." I nodded, mindful of Giles's sacrifice and the lives laid bare by deceit. "Do you think Lady Ravenscroft would have approved of our methods, Poirot?" He tapped his temple lightly. "Madame would have appreciated our precision, for she prided herself on justice served with elegance and care. And now her spirit may rest, knowing her little grey cells are not the only ones to have prevailed." As late afternoon approached, the remaining guests prepared to depart. Poirot escorted Edward Ravenscroft to the front door and patted him reassuringly on the shoulder. "My friend, may you honour your cousin's memory by governing Greystone, manure with integrity and compassion." Edward closed the door behind his departing friends and turned to Poirot. I am forever in your debt, Monsieur Poirot. Without you, I fear I might have paid my own life's cost in misunderstanding." Poirot smiled. "Let us hope your future is brighter, Edward, and may you prove that the tragedy we endured will yield a renewed commitment to honesty." Later, with only Inspector Japp and the valet remaining, Poirot set aside his gloves and picked up his walking stick. "Inspector, I believe my presence is no longer required here. The police will handle the Baron's prosecution, and the household is in capable hands." Japp grunted. "You are right, Poirot, though I must admit I shall miss the challenge." He offered his hand. Poirot took it warmly. "Mon ami, we have made a formidable team. Until our next case, I remain your humble servant of justice." As the inspector departed, Poirot stood alone in the drawing-room, his figure framed by the afternoon light. He gazed upon the portrait of Lady Ravenscroft, her serene countenance a testament to grace under duress. Then, with a gentle sigh, he returned to his armchair, removed his gloves, and allowed himself a moment's repose. In that quiet stillness, I observed the satisfaction that comes from truth laid bare, and from justice rendered with unwavering clarity. For in the end it was not merely the puzzle that mattered, but the courage of hearts that sought honesty above all else, and in those little grey cells Poirot carried the enduring light of human decency. Chapter 12. Departure and Reflection. Late afternoon sun cast long golden beams through the tall windows of Lady Ravenscroft's drawing-room, illuminating the worn rug where so much drama had unfolded. The household staff moved quietly about their duties, replacing flowers and straightening cushions, as though restoring order after a tempest. I found Hercule Poirot standing beside the mantelpiece, gazing thoughtfully at the portrait of our late hostess. His little grey cells, I knew, continued their silent labour even in repose. "Mon ami," I said softly, "the house feels whole once more." Poirot turned, his crisp black waistcoat unruffled, and his moustache in perfect symmetry. "Indeed, Hastings, the storm has passed, and the calm that follows is the sweetest of all." He extended a gloved hand toward the portrait. Lady Ravenscroft would have been pleased to see her home at peace. Just then, Inspector Japp entered with the day's dispatches. "All is in order here, Poirot. The Baron will be arraigned tomorrow at Bow Street. Giles's funeral takes place at St. Mary's at 3. He paused, hands in his pockets. "I suppose you'll be off soon?" "Alas, yes," Poirot replied, with a small sigh. "A detective must ever remain in motion, lest evil flourish in idle hearts." He smiled wistfully. "But before I depart, I wish to thank you, Inspector, and all who aided in these inquiries." Japp nodded. "I'll miss your methods, old friend. Though I admit I dread thinking of playing cards without your little psychological games." Poirot chuckled. "And the lack of your brusque impatience to keep me sharp." He patted Japp's shoulder. "Until the next case, mon ami." As Japp took his leave, Poirot turned to me. "Hastings, my faithful chronicler, will you join me on a walk through the gardens before I depart? The air is crisp, and the mind benefits from a final reflection." I agreed eagerly, and we stepped into the rose-bordered terrace. The petals glowed like embers in the dying light, and the statues of classical goddesses stood sentinel over neatly clipped hedges. We walked in companionable silence, footsteps muffled by the soft gravel. "So much sorrow for so little wrongdoing," I murmured. "One man's greed led to 2 deaths, and a household's terror." Poirot paused beneath an arch of jasmine. "Ah, but greed is universal, my friend. It lurks in hearts both noble and base. The difference lies in its mastery, or its surrender. Baron von Stein surrendered to greed. Giles mastered loyalty to his final breath. A solitary nightingale began its song, and Poirot raised his gaze to the dusky sky. There is a lesson here, Hastings, that evil often wears a mask of civility, and justice must pierce both disguise and deception. Yet justice is not mere punishment. It is restoration. Tonight, Lady Ravenscroft's spirit may rest, knowing her little grey cells and ours have prevailed." I inhaled the fragrant air. And what of the future of Greystone Manor? Will Edward prove worthy? Poirot inclined his head. "I have faith in him. A heart once burdened by guilt may find redemption in purpose. He has faced truth and emerged stronger. His stewardship of the estate will honour his cousin's memory." We wandered toward the statue of Diana, goddess of the hunt, like Diana's arrow, Poirot said. "Justice must fly true and strike the heart of wrongdoing." He paused, eyes twinkling, and like Artemis, the hunt must be swift, lest the quarry escape into the night. He tapped his temple. "But above all, one must use the little grey cells, for they are the surest guide in the labyrinth of the human soul." A gardener paused to tend a rosebush, offering a polite nod as we passed. Poirot doffed his hat. "Mes amis," he called, "beauty and order are rewards for vigilance." Then, turning to me, he added, "Let us take one last look at this sanctuary before we rejoin the world beyond." We stood together, surveying the walled garden awash in twilight. The distant rumble of London traffic drifted through the open windows of the house, reminders of the city's ceaseless pulse. Poirot inhaled deeply, then exhaled slowly. "Tomorrow, Hastings, we return to the bustle. But tonight, may we remember that human nature is a garden of delicate blooms and poisonous thorns alike. It takes only one poisoned root to endanger thee whole. Our task is to root out that poison with care and precision." I nodded, moved by the profundity of his words. I shall carry that lesson with me always. Poirot offered a gracious bow. "Then all is well. Come, let us bid farewell to this house of mirrors and shadows, where truth emerged at last into the perfect light." We passed back through the doorway into the drawing-room, where the final rays of sun fell upon empty chairs and the silent hearth. Poirot removed his gloves and placed them upon the mantel, then picked up his walking-stick with a gentle click. At the front door, he paused and turned to me with a playful glint. "Hastings, remember this. It is the little things, the faintest fibre, the quietest confession, that unlock the greatest mysteries. Take care, mon ami, that you never underestimate their power." I smiled. "I won't, Poirot." With that, he stepped into the evening air, coat-tails swishing, figure erect and purposeful. I watched him go, the lantern light framing his silhouette until it merged with the shadows of the street. Then, with the echoes of Nightingale's song still on the breeze, I closed the door gently behind him, carrying with me the final echo of his parting insight. And so ends the affair at Lady Ravenscroft's drawing-room, a testament to the enduring truth that where human hearts deceive, the little grey cells shall one day decipher their secrets, and justice, as delicate and relentless as dawn's first light, shall prevail. Chapter 13. Epilogue. The Widow's Shawl. 2 weeks had passed since the tumult at Lady Ravenscroft's Mayfair residence, yet the memory of those fateful days remained vivid in my mind. Edward Ravenscroft, now sole heir to Greystone Manor, had invited me to visit the estate, that I might see how the widow's legacy endured. I arrived on a crisp morning in late April. The rolling grounds of Greystone bathed in soft sunshine and the promise of new beginnings. Edward greeted me at the carriage house, looking steadier than I had seen him in the drawing-room's tense aftermath. His cheeks bore a healthy flush, and his eyes held a calm resolve. In his hand he carried a small, velvet-lined box, the final resting-place of Lady Ravenscroft's midnight blue shawl, now free of both stain and sorrow. "Captain Hastings," he said warmly, "I'm grateful you came. I wished to show you how her memory guides my stewardship here." We walked along the gravel path toward the manor's north wing, where the library overlooked the terraced gardens. The building's Georgian facade, pillared, dignified, seemed unaltered by scandal, yet I sensed the weight of history in every stone. Inside the library, Edward laid the velvet box upon a polished side table. He opened it with a small clang of silver hinges. There, folded neatly, lay the shawl, its silk threads as lustrous as the day it was draped around his cousin's shoulders. The silver pin, recovered and restored, gleamed against the fabric like a tiny star. "I intend to display it here," Edward explained, "beneath glass, so that all who visit Greystone may recall both the beauty of her spirit and the price of betrayal. Giles's courage will be remembered alongside hers." He ran a finger along the shawl's edge, tracing the delicate embroidery of vines and blossoms. I nodded, feeling a surge of emotion. "It is fitting, Edward. The shawl symbolizes more than tragedy. It stands for the quiet dignity with which Lady Ravenscroft faced deception, and the loyalty Giles embodied in safeguarding her secret." Edward closed the box gently. "I have catalogued her papers in this library, her correspondence, diaries, even the photograph fragment. I am working with counsel to ensure every document is preserved for the history of this family and as evidence for the legal proceedings against the Baron." He sighed, gaze distant. "I find solace in order, much as Poirot would." We spent the afternoon in the library, reviewing Lady Ravenscroft's financial records. Edward has already begun remedial work on the estate's accounts, instituting transparent measures that would have prevented the Baron's machinations. He spoke with quiet conviction of his plans, restoring the formal gardens, endowing local charities, and inviting tenants to a fair rent review. By dusk, we moved to the drawing-room, where a modest fire burned in the hearth. Edward presented tea in delicate china cups, and we spoke of gentler matters: spring lamb grazing on the terraces, the primroses along the woodland path, and the robin that nested each year in the old stone wall. In those ordinary notes lay the promise of renewal. Before I could inquire further, Edward's housekeeper entered with a letter bearing no crest but Poirot's unmistakable handwriting. He handed it to Edward, who opened it with a mixture of curiosity and reverence. The folded parchment read, "My dear Edward, I trust that Greystone Manor thrives under your care, and that the trials of recent weeks have accorded you both strength and wisdom. The widow's shawl now rests where it belongs, an emblem of truth preserved. As for my own journey, I find my little grey cells ever restless. A new case beckons in the heart of the city, one that involves a stolen manuscript and a vanished scholar. Should you ever require my services again, you need but send word. Until then, I remain, with the deepest esteem, Hercule Poirot." Edward read aloud, then folded the letter, eyes shining. "He writes as though he were here with us, so precise, so spirited." He smiled. "I cannot imagine the world without his presence." I agreed. "His methods are singular, but his kindness is equally remarkable." Edward rose and placed the letter on his desk. "I intend to write to him at once, with my thanks and, perhaps, an invitation to Greystone's summer fete." He paused. "He deserves a respite after all he has endured." We concluded our visit with a stroll through the moonlit gardens, where the elderly oak tree stood sentinel. Beneath its boughs, Edward unwrapped the shawl box and, with care, draped the fabric over a wrought-iron bench. The shawl caught the moonlight, its deep blue as infinite as the night sky. "Here," Edward said softly, "it will remain, a reminder to all who seek power that beauty and truth are worth protecting, even at the greatest cost." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Greystone Manor will flourish under your guidance. Edward, your cousin would be proud." As I prepared to depart at dawn, Edward accompanied me to the carriage. Before we parted, he retrieved a single silver hairpin, one of many he had commissioned to commemorate Lady Ravenscroft's style, and attached it to my lapel. "For protection," he said, "and so that you might carry a piece of this story with you." I accepted with gratitude, promising to honour both the pin and its memory. As the carriage pulled away, I looked back at the lit windows of Greystone Manor, a beacon of resilience against the dark. In the weeks that followed, news arrived of the Baron's conviction and of Edward's reform of estate affairs. Poirot's promised case in London opened fresh vistas of intellectual challenge. Yet I remained mindful of Greystone's tale, its lesson etched in silk and silver. Thus ends this chronicle of the affair at Hercule Poirot and the clue hidden in the widow's shawl. May it serve as testament to the power of the little grey cells, the courage of faithful hearts, and the enduring light of justice, even in the quietest corners of the human soul. Chapter 14. A New Intrigue at Greystone. A fortnight beyond my visit to Greystone Manor, I received an unexpected parcel bearing Lady Ravenscroft's familiar crest, a midnight blue shawl entwined with silver vines. Inside lay no garment, but a folded sheet of pale stationery, penned in a hand both elegant and urgent. "Captain Hastings, should you read this, know that I find myself drawn into matters that recall our adventure at Mayfair. A certain antiquarian in Oxford has vanished, along with a priceless medieval codex. The local constabulary are baffled. I anticipate your presence in London, whence we shall travel together. Pray bring your little grey cells to bear once more. H. P. My heart quickened at the invitation. Though Edward's stewardship and the memory of Giles's loyalty remained close in my thoughts, The call of Poirot's intellect was magnetic. Untu once penned my reply, committing to meet him in Baker Street in 3 days' time. In the interim, I journeyed back to Greystone, eager to observe the hallmarks of Edward's reforms. The carriage rumbled through spring countryside. The manors, spires rose against a vault of pale blue. I noted the freshly laid stone pathways and the new glass cases in the library, where Lady Ravenscroft's diaries and the fragment of photograph now occupied places of honour, quiet reminders of courage and truth. Edward greeted me in the entrance hall, enthusiastic and composed. "Hastings, I trust your return was comfortable. The staff are eager to learn of your forthcoming journey." He led me into the drawing room, where the silver-pin display glowed beneath soft uplighting. "You will take this with you," he said, pressing into my palm the very filigree pin that had once fastened the widow's shawl, a talisman of sorts to guide your path. I accepted gratefully, noting the pin's cool weight. "Thank you, Edward. Its significance has grown beyond mere evidence. It is a symbol of faith in justice." He nodded. "And when you confront this Oxford mystery, know that Greystone's lessons remain with you. I have every confidence in Monsieur Poirot's ultimate success." That evening, over simple fare of roast pheasant and honeyed pears, we discussed Oxford's vanished antiquarian, Dr. Lionel Merriweather, a respected scholar of illuminated manuscripts. Rumour held that he possessed the Codex Aurelius, a 12th-century folio reputedly containing a secret cipher. The local police reported no sign of forced entry at Merriweather's study, nor any clue to his disappearance. "What intrigues me," Edward said, "is that Dr. Merriweather wrote to me last month, seeking advice on estate management. An odd request considering his academic circle." He studied the candlelight. "He seemed nervous in that letter, as though he feared someone was watching him." I weighed the facts: a scholar, a missing codex, a clandestine cipher, and undue interest in estate affairs. Ingredients poised for Poirot's unique approach. We may find that Dr. Merriweather's concern for his family's lands parallels Lady Ravenscroft's own predicament, I observed. A reminder that, in the convergence of knowledge and ambition, deceit may lurk in unexpected quarters. The following dawn, I took leave of Greystone with Edward's blessings. The journey to London was swift, and by mid-afternoon I stood once more before the familiar black door of 221B Baker Street. Inside, the ever-alert visage of Hercule Poirot greeted me, moustache gleaming, eyes alight with anticipation. "Mon ami," he exclaimed, embracing me with unexpected warmth. "You have come at precisely the right moment. We depart for Oxford at once." I presented the shawl pin. Edward entrusted this to me, as both talisman and tribute. Poirot's gaze softened, a most fitting accompaniment. For in every case we carry the imprint of those we serve, and of those we have lost. He slipped the pin into his waistcoat pocket. Thus, with our preparations complete, we set forth on the next leg of our journey, bound for Oxford's dreaming spires and the mystery of the missing codex. Behind us lay the affair of the widow's shawl, whose threads of betrayal and courage had been unravelled by little grey cells. Ahead lay fresh puzzles, new deceptions, and, I had no doubt, another demonstration of Poirot's unrivalled craft. And so, as Greystone's turrets disappeared from view, I felt the threads of two mysteries converge. One rooted in high society's elegance, the other in the hushed halls of scholarship. In the cradle of England's past, we would seek a vanished scholar and a stolen treasure, guided always by the enduring principles of justice and the razor-sharp insight of Hercule Poirot. Chapter 15. The Oxford Enigma. The coach rattled through the narrow lanes of Oxford as dusk settled over the dreaming spires. Gaslights flickered to life along High Street, and the worn stones of college quadrangles gleamed in the evening mist. Hercule Poirot, perched primly beside me, peered out the window with an intensity that bespoke both anticipation and calculation. "Mon ami," he said, smoothing his immaculate waistcoat, "Oxford is a city of secrets. Its ancient colleges hide corridors of scholarship, and, as we see, corridors of intrigue." He tapped his temple. "I trust our little grey cells are ready for the challenge." I nodded. Dr. Lionel Merriweather's disappearance is most perplexing. No sign of forced entry, no cry for help, and a priceless codex gone without trace. Poirot's lips curved. "A scholar's world, Hastings. Passion for knowledge can become obsession. The Codex Aurelius, with its purported cipher, entices both the sincere student and the unscrupulous seeker." He leaned closer. "We must distinguish between those drawn to preserve history and those bent on exploiting its power. At Carfax Tower, we disembarked and made our way to Merriweather's lodgings, a modest house at the edge of Magdalen College. A single lantern burned in the front window. We knocked and were admitted by a spectacled porter in a tweed coat. "Detective Poirot?" the porter asked, bowing. "Thank you for coming. I fear something dreadful has occurred." He led us through a narrow hall into Dr. Merriweather's study. The room was lined with tall shelves, overflowing with ancient tomes. A large oak desk stood beneath a mullioned window. Upon it lay a scattering of papers, a single quill, and an empty display case that once held the Codex Aurelius. Inspector Swan of the Oxford Constabulary entered behind us, bowing in deference to Poirot. "Monsieur," he said, "we have secured the premises. No one has entered since my men locked it at first light. Yet early this morning, the doctor's housekeeper found his door ajar, and the codex, well, gone." Poirot surveyed the scene with keen interest. "Observe, Hastings, the window is latched from within, no sign of removal." He examined the latch closely, then turned to Swan. "Did you note any footprints on the sill or ledge outside?" The inspector shook his head. "None, monsieur. The sill was undisturbed. No ladder marks on the wall. Whoever entered or exited did so from inside." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "A cunning method, perhaps by a hidden passage or a collaborator within the house." He glanced at the shelves. "And what of these books? Any volumes missing or out of place?" Swan indicated a small ladder. He was cataloguing a donation of medieval manuscripts. "Several volumes have been misplaced, but none of great value." Poirot strode to the display case. Its glass panel lay on the floor, cracked and dusted with chalky residue. "Note the crack, a precise break at the corner. Someone used a thin blade, then swept away the glass fragments." He knelt and pointed to a smudge of red wax on the cushion where the codex had rested. "This wax comes from sealing sticks used to secure letters. The burgundy hue matches the wax on his correspondence." I picked up a torn piece of parchment from beneath a chair. Here is a fragment of his last letter to me. He wrote of meeting someone at dusk to reveal the cipher. I held the scrap to the light, but it ends mid-sentence. Poirot took it. Yes, he wrote, "Meet me by the Sheldonian steps at sunset. The cipher I have decoded reveals—" And here is where he was interrupted. He tapped the jagged edge. "We must find that message's conclusion. It may name the person he trusted most." Swan frowned. The only other person in the house last night was his housekeeper, Mrs. Blake. She retired early. At that moment, Mrs. Blake entered, her apron still pinned neatly at her waist. Her eyes were red-rimmed. I only wished to make sure Dr. Merriweather was safe. I found his door ajar and feared an accident." She glanced at the broken case. "Never did I imagine he would vanish." Poirot's gaze softened. "Madame, did you hear or see anything unusual last eve? Any visitors, footsteps, or voices?" Mrs. Blake paused. "At dusk, I thought I heard a faint murmur of voices on the landing. 2 tones, one deep, one alto. I looked but saw no one. I assumed it was students in the corridor." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you, madame." He turned to me. "Hastings, we have several threads. The intact latch, the cracked glass, the red wax, and the fragment of letter. Let us pursue each." He addressed Inspector Swan. "We shall need to interview those who knew Dr. Merriweather's schedule." Swan produced a list. "Here are his usual appointments. Professor Allington to discuss cataloguing, Mr. Calder, the antiquarian dealer, and Miss Penelope Finch, his research assistant." Poirot smiled. "Then we proceed at once. Time, as always, is of the essence." We first visited Professor Allington in his college rooms. The professor, a rotund man with a genial smile, insisted he left Merriweather well at 6 o'clock, meeting him by the Radcliffe camera to examine a restored manuscript. He claimed no knowledge of the codex's value beyond academic interest. Yet, as he led us through his cluttered study, Poirot's eye caught a small vial of red sealing wax identical to that on the cushion. "Ah, Professor," Poirot remarked, "I see you preserve your correspondence with the same wax. Did you seal any letters for Dr. Merriweather last eve?" Allington's face reddened. Yes, I sent him a sealed draft of my critique. I placed it on his desk myself." Poirot nodded, but did not elaborate. Outside he whispered to me, "Note how Allington's wax matches. He accessed Merriweather's desk under the guise of scholarly exchange. We cannot dismiss him yet." Next, we called upon Mr. Calder, the dealer whose shop lay beneath the Bodleian's cloisters. Calder greeted us amid shelves of vellum scrolls. "The Codex Aurelius? Yes, Dr. Merriweather displayed it yesterday. He left it here for appraisal and promised to collect it before sunset." He snapped his fingers. "He must have forgotten, yet the case here is empty." Poirot ran a gloved hand over the bezel of the case's lock. "I see your appraisal table is moved. Did you observe any visitor while the codex was here?" Calder frowned. "Only my assistant, Miss Finch. She closed shop at 6. On to Miss Penelope Finch, then. A diligent young woman who wore her hair in a tight chignon and carried a satchel of notes. She answered our knock with measured courtesy. Inside the neglected study, she confirmed the day's work, transcribing the cipher, debating its meaning, and preparing a final report. Dr. Merriweather arranged to meet someone at the Sheldonian steps, and I heard his footsteps depart around 6:30. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "You heard him leave, Miss Finch. Did you hear anyone follow him or speak to him?" She glanced at the empty chair. "No, but after he left, I heard a murmur as I closed a window. It ceased when I entered the hallway." Poirot placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Thank you, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful." As we emerged into the night air, Poirot paused beneath the glow of the Radcliffe Tower. "Hastings, we are at an impasse. No forced entry, no footprints, but a broken display and vanished scholar. Yet the red wax, the fragment, and the voices on the landing suggest collaboration, a betrayal from within the household." I frowned. "So our suspect is among those we've met?" Poirot nodded. "Yes, but not one alone. A team, perhaps, scholar and dealer, assistant and porter, working in concert to claim the codex and silence the doctor." He tapped his cane. "Tomorrow we gather them once more. We shall contrive a demonstration of the cipher, and watch who falters under pressure. That will reveal the guilty party." I saw his plan take shape, a psychological trap in the heart of Oxford itself. As we returned to Merriweather's lodgings to rest and prepare, I felt the familiar thrill of anticipation. The Oxford enigma had been laid before us. The next move would draw out its hidden architect, and Poirot's little grey cells, as ever, would be poised to uncover the truth. Chapter 16. The Cipher's Crucible. At the first light of morning, Hercule Poirot directed Inspector Swan to assemble Professor Ellington, Mr. Calder, Miss Finch, Mrs. Blake, and one other witness, the porter, in Dr. Merriweather's study. The once disordered room was now restored, shelves neatly aligned, the oak desk cleared of extraneous papers, and a single easel holding a large parchment bearing the partial cipher Merriweather had decoded. Below it lay the torn fragment of his letter, pinned to a board. A hush fell as the six assembled, each wearing an expression of polite curiosity tinged with apprehension. Poirot entered, moustache gleaming, and addressed them with genteel authority. "Mes amis, today we confront the Oxford enigma. We shall demonstrate the cipher discovered by Dr. Merriweather and invite you to partake in its completion. In so doing, I trust the guilty heart will reveal itself through hesitation, contradiction, or over-eagerness." He gestured to the parchment. "Behold the text. In the shadow of the Sheldonian, beneath the lion's gaze, the path to truth is written in blood and blossom. Seek the verse where roses weep, and the guardian's key will open the vault." Dr. Merriweather translated the first lines, but the final phrase eluded him. "Let each of you offer the missing words, drawing upon your knowledge of medieval poetry and the Codex Aurelius. Speak freely." A murmur of surprise rippled through the group. Professor Ellington stepped forward first, clearing his throat. "This suggests a reference to the famed Rose Lament. Thus, the missing line might read, 'Where sorrow's petals fall.'" He paused. It is well within Merriweather's style to invoke such imagery. Poirot inclined his head, making a note. An elegant suggestion, yet let us hear from someone closer to the manuscript itself. Miss Finch advanced, eyes bright with scholarly zeal. Dr. Merriweather appended a gloss about a cryptic allusion to Persephone, until the maid returns. So I propose the full line, until the maid returns from night. Her confidence drew a curt nod from Mr. Calder, who stepped forward next. Both fine readings, but as a dealer of rare manuscripts, I believe the Codex's cipher hinges on ecclesiastical verse. The final line could be, "And the guardian's heart shall bloom." Professor Aylington cleared his throat again. That seems speculative. Calder's lips curved. Perhaps. Yet I have handled more than one codex in my time, and recognize the flourish of metaphor. Miss Finch frowned, but the earlier gloss specifies guardian's key, not heart. As voices rose, Mrs. Blake, pale but determined, spoke softly from the back. "If I may, I observed Dr. Merriweather's notes mention the lion's gaze as symbol of St. Mark. In Venetian manuscripts, the line often concludes, 'And Venice holds the seal.'" A startled gasp emerged. The porter, who had stood silent until now, cleared his throat. "I beg your pardon, but Dr. Merriweather once showed me a notation he made in Latin. Clavis custodiae rosa affronta. He translated it as the key of the keeper faces, the rose. Perhaps the English line is, where keeper meets the rose." Poirot held up a gloved hand. "Excellent, but we require precision. Each of your proposals draws upon varied scholarship. Yet only one aligns with Merriweather's. Cipher." He turned to Inspector Swan. "Please bring in the Codex's preliminary transcription." Swan produced a slim volume, opened carefully to reveal Merriweather's painstaking transcription of the original medieval Latin. Poirot ran a fingertip down the lines, then closed his eyes in concentration. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "the true resolution will emerge only when every suggestion is weighed against the Latin's meter and Merriweather's own marginalia. Therefore, I invite each of you to point out any inconsistency or merit in these 4 readings, citing Merriweather's annotations. We shall observe your confidence or your hesitation." A sudden silence ensued. Professor Aylington peered at the transcription. His brow furrowed. He glanced at the others, then pressed his lips together. Mr. Calder cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. Miss Finch's eyes darted from the parchment to the assembled faces. Mrs. Blake's knuckles whitened on her apron. The porter fidgeted, gaze fixed on the floor. Poirot tapped his cane lightly. "Professor Aylington, your suggestion of where sorrow's petals fall. Does Merriweather's note Rosa Lugan's support this translation?" Aylington's voice wavered. The Latin reads Rosa Lugan's custodum, which is more accurately the weeping rose guards. I may have erred." He glanced at Miss Finch, uncertain. Poirot turned to Miss Finch. "And your line, until the maid returns from night. Does that align with Domina Nocte Revocata in the margin?" Miss Finch swallowed. "Dr. Merriweather abbreviated that as DNR, but I understood it as a personal note, not part of the verse." Her cheeks flushed. "Indeed," Poirot said, "it appears peripheral. Mr. Calder, your proposed flourish, 'And the guardian's heart shall bloom.' Does the term core appear anywhere in the Latin?" Calder's face reddened. "No, only custodiae, the guarding, not the heart. I may have been overzealous." He avoided Mrs. Blake's eye as Poirot addressed her. Madame, your Venetian reading, and Venice holds the seal. Does Venetia sigillum appear in the manuscript?" Mrs. Blake's voice was tremulous. I only recalled Dr. Merriweather mentioning Venice in a lecture." She clasped her hands. "But it was not part of the cipher." Poirot turned to the porter. "And finally, your suggestion, where keeper meets the rose. Does that reflect the term custodum rosum in the text?" The porter trembled. "Yes, but I thought Dr. Merriweather corrected it." He looked at the floor. "I only meant to help." Poirot's eyes glittered. "We see hesitation in every account, except one." He reached into his waistcoat and drew forth the torn fragment of Merriweather's letter. Unfolding it, he read, "The codex hides the final key. Where keeper meets the bloom, there lies the gate. Seek the bloom, and truth abides." He set the fragment on the desk. "The true line, Hastings, is plainly here. Where keeper meets the bloom, there lies the gate." He addressed the suspects. "Only one among you knew this exact phrasing, Miss Finch, who transcribed that letter word for word when she assisted the doctor with his cipher notebook." Miss Finch's face went ashen. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Professor Allington's lips curled in triumph. Mr. Calder stiffened, and Mrs. Blake let out a small gasp. The porter averted his eyes. Poirot turned to Swan. "Miss Finch, you will accompany the inspector for further questioning." He paused, letting the weight of her reaction settle. For the first time, we observe the guilty mind's tremor, hesitation, the involuntary reddening of the countenance, and the feeble denial of knowledge known only to the intimate scribe. Miss Finch rose, trembling. I confess, I feared exposure of my own pact with Mr. Calder. We sought to sell the codex to a foreign collector. Dr. Merriweather threatened to reveal our scheme. I must have slipped away to meet him by the Sheldonian steps, and—" Her voice broke. "Inspector," Swan stepped forward, handcuffs in hand. "You have the right to remain silent." Poirot waved a dismissive hand. "No need for formalities here. Your confession is your undoing. We shall reconstruct the rest in due course." As Miss Finch was led away, the assembled scholars stood in stunned silence. Poirot closed the transcription booklet and addressed me with a soft chuckle. "Hastings, the crucible of the cipher has done its work. The guilty heart cannot sustain the weight of its own deception when pressed by truth." I nodded, absorbing the lesson. Outside, Oxford's bells tolled the hour. Ominous yet precise. Within the study, the Oxford enigma had surrendered its secret, and only one chapter remained, the final reveal, where justice would claim its own reward. Chapter 17. The Hidden Sanctuary. The morning sunlight filtered through the mullioned windows of Dr. Merriweather's study, illuminating the dusty tomes and scattered papers that bore witness to our late-night revelations. Though Miss Finch had confessed to Inspector Swan, the Codex Aurelius itself remained elusive. Hercule Poirot, standing beside the empty display case, regarded its fractured glass with a mixture of curiosity and resolve. "Mon ami," he said softly, turning to me, "we have unmasked the traitor, yet the prize still hides. We must recover. The codex before its secrets are lost to avarice." He tapped his temple. "Let us consider where Miss Finch might have stowed the book. where only she and Mr. Calder held the key. Inspector Swan entered, followed by a pair of constables. He saluted Poirot. Miss Finch and Mr. Calder are in the lock-up. They await your direction regarding the codex. He produced their written confessions, each implicating the other in the theft and concealment. Poirot took the papers, scanning them with rapid eyes. They speak of hiding it in a sanctuary of knowledge, a place Merryweather visited alone. He looked at Swan. Did the doctor have any secret retreats beyond this study? Swan frowned, considering. He often walked in the Bodleians, restricted archives, but access requires a keycard. He tapped his chin. He also spent quiet mornings in the college chapel's vestry, where he meditated on the codex's illustrations. Poirot smiled. Then we shall search both. Hastings, see to it that the chapel vestry is examined. Inspector, will you accompany me to the archives? I hurried away as Poirot and Swan strode toward the Bodleians' heavy doors. The porter, summoned for access, awaited with 2 keys, one for the vestry, one for the archives. I paused before the chapel's arched entrance, inhaling the scent of aged wood and incense. The vestry door yielded at Poirot's gentle touch. Inside, a solitary oak lectern stood beneath a stained-glass window. I scanned the shelves of hymnals and prayer books. Poirot inspected the embroidered cushions on the kneelers. There, beneath the cushion of the high-backed chair, he discovered the edge of a velvet binding. "Ah, Hastings!" he exclaimed quietly. With a swift motion, he withdrew the Codex Aurelius, its cover of tooled leather and silver clasps shining like a treasure. Reclaimed. Mon Dieu, this is our prize. He held it reverently. Now, let us confirm the final details with our culprit. We returned to Merryweather's house, where Miss Finch and Mr. Calder sat in separate rooms, each awaiting our arrival. Inspector Swan ushered them into the study, the codex placed prominently upon the desk. Both pallid with apprehension, they avoided each other's gaze. Poirot addressed them together. "Mesdemoiselles, messieurs, you confessed to conspiring, to steal the codex, and to deprive Dr. Merryweather of his discovery. I have retrieved the book from the chapel vestry, where the doctor's trust in your scholarship provided cover. It remained hidden beneath the vestry chair, that you might retrieve it under the pretense of religious solace." Miss Finch's voice quavered. "We plan to sell the manuscript and share the proceeds." Mr. Calder shook his head. "I only agreed because she assured me the doctor's attention was diverted by his studies elsewhere." Poirot inclined his head. "Yet you underestimated the strength of loyalty and the power of the little grey cells. When you removed the codex and broke the display, you left the latch intact, believing no one would suspect an inside job." He paused. "Then you fractured the glass to suggest forced entry, obscuring the red wax that linked you to the crime." Swan produced the red wax seals from Calder's shop, identical to those found on the case cushion. "You sealed the fragments in your possession, hoping they would not be traced." Calder's shoulders slumped. "Yes, I thought our involvement would remain invisible." Poirot turned to Miss Finch. "And you, mademoiselle, misplaced the letter fragment when you fled to the Sheldonian steps. You dropped it only to delay us, yet it led us swiftly back to your cell of collusion." Miss Finch buried her face in her hands. "I am sorry, Dr. Merryweather. I did not intend for it to go so far." Poirot's voice was grave. "Your ambition became your undoing. Now, the codex is returned, and the guilty must face the consequences." He looked to Inspector Swan. "Inspector, will you see that both are charged with theft and conspiracy?" Swan nodded. "I will, Monsieur Poirot." As the constables moved to take Miss Finch and Mr. Calder away, I observed Poirot's thoughtful gaze on the Codex Aurelius. He lifted it carefully and examined its spine. "Hastings," he said softly, "the Codex's true value lies not in the price it might fetch, but in the knowledge it imparts. Let this be a lesson. Those who seek to profit from history betray not only a scholar, but the very heritage of humanity." I bowed my head in agreement. "And Dr. Merriweather will be restored to his rightful place." Poirot closed the codex and placed it gently on the desk. "Yes, Hastings, justice has been done. Tomorrow we shall return it to the Bodleian, where it belongs. Tonight we rest in the satisfaction that knowledge, like truth, cannot be buried forever." In the hush of the study, the ancient manuscript lay safe once more, its pages awaiting the careful hands of the rightful custodian. And as I watched Poirot's serene profile, I knew that even in the hallowed halls of scholarship, human frailty could never outmatch the steadfast brilliance of the little grey cells. Chapter 18. Justice Restored. The next morning, Oxford awoke to a clear sky and the gentle tolling of the Bodleian's bells. At the stroke of 9, Hercule Poirot, Inspector Swan, and I stood before the grand façade of the library, the Codex Aurelius secured in its protective case. A small gathering of librarians and university officials awaited us in the courtyard, their expressions a mixture of relief and admiration. Poirot addressed the assembly with his customary courtesy. "Ladies and gentlemen, we return not merely a manuscript, but a legacy of knowledge that belongs to all who cherish learning. Let this day remind us that truth, like the written word, transcends the petty designs of those who would cloak it in darkness." With that, the case was handed over to the Bodleian's keeper of manuscripts, who bowed deeply. "We are grateful, Monsieur Poirot. The Codex will be restored to its rightful place, where scholars may once more unlock its secrets, under proper watch." Poirot smiled, but his eyes were already scanning the faces around him. He turned to Inspector Swan. "Inspector, now that our culprit awaits trial, I trust you will see that justice is carried out with both firmness and fairness." Swan nodded. "Indeed, Miss Finch and Mr. Calder will face charges, but I shall recommend leniency for cooperation and confession." As the officials dispersed, Poirot guided me to a quiet cloister, its arches intertwining overhead. The air was cool, scented with the bloom of early summer jasmine. "Hastings," he said, "we began with a vanished scholar and a stolen codex. We uncovered betrayal among those closest to knowledge itself. Yet in the end, it was not cunning alone that triumphed, but careful attention to the smallest details, the quiver of a wax seal, the tremor of a letter fragment, the hesitation of those under scrutiny." I nodded. "Your method revealed that even those devoted to truth can falter when ambition supersedes principle." Poirot's moustache twitched in agreement. "Precisely. The little grey cells must ever guide us back to integrity." He paused, then glanced toward the stone bench where Dr. Merriweather now sat, speaking quietly with his housekeeper and the keeper. The scholar's face bore exhaustion but also gratitude. "He will need time to heal," I observed. "Yet the codex's return must be a balm to his spirit." Poirot's gaze softened. For Dr. Merriweather, the restoration of his work is the fondest reward. His faith in his own integrity and our resolve has been vindicated. We walked back toward the main entrance, where a small student contingent had gathered. One bold undergraduate stepped forward, offering Poirot a bound volume of local inquiries. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, "we would be honoured if you might permit us to study how you untangled this mystery. Your approach is inspirational." Poirot accepted the volume with gracious modesty. "My dear fellow, the true credit belongs to the collaborative spirit of all involved, the constables, the scholars, and the faithful housekeeper who first raised the alarm. May you carry these lessons into your own pursuits." As we made our way down the stone steps, the keeper called out, "You are always welcome here, Monsieur Poirot." He inclined his head. "I shall return, should my services again be of use. For now, Oxford stands secure in the guardianship of its truth." Outside, the city hummed with life. Pigeons fluttered about the quadrangle, cycle bells tinkled, and scholars hurried across cobbled streets. Poirot inhaled the air deeply, then turned to me with a quiet smile. "Hastings, our work here is done. We have seen how the thirst for knowledge can be perverted, yet also how justice, tempered by mercy, can restore order. Let us now journey on. There are always new puzzles awaiting the little grey cells." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Where to next, Poirot?" He tapped his temple. "Ah, that is the question, mon ami. But wherever we go, we shall carry with us the knowledge that no secret, however deeply buried, can withstand the light of reason." And so, beneath Oxford's soaring spires, and in the shadow of its centuries-old wisdom, the final chapter closed, on another case solved. The Codex Aurelius rested once more in hallowed halls, its pages safe for generations to come, while Poirot and Hastings set forth, ever in pursuit of truth's next alluring mystery.